Thank you, thank you. You look like you're doing your flag corps routine there.
I was doing driving while listening to someone.
Excellent, excellent. I think we've got a quorum. They're heading in right now. Hello, thank you guys so much for being here. Come on in, come on in.
7.
Daryl, how are you?
Yes, yes.
How are you?
Good.
How are you, sir? So please, you don't even start with me. Glorious.
Fantastic.
Do you know Anthony Miller?
Yes, I love him.
So he's going to be your next judge member starting in July
On here.
on here.
But no. No.
So I'll tell you, philosophically why I'm doing it.
Okay.
I believe,
You're leaving?
yeah. Anthony Miller. You're gonna love him.
I love him, but
Yeah, but we're gonna miss you. I
Don't
know.
worry. He's gonna let me still
I'll stay
Okay.
involved. But the way I see this,
I am fine. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for checking. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
The judge should not be the
good.
chair. The judge should not be. The judge should be a resource for the other council members about how decisions. And
Yes, she sent me a message.
I know. No, we did not consult. There was no
we did
quorum.
not
We didn't
confer.
vote on
We
that.
didn't talk in the sunshine about
There
that.
was no motion. There was
No.
no public comment.
Rocky, I appreciate
I have some comments on this.
We talked, Carly and I already talked about it this afternoon.
So
What's his name?
Anthony Miller, when I'm making assignments,
Not much. Sharp
Yeah.
day, you know, put a coat on.
just ones,
I
are you okay?
Ah, you good. You good.
Anthony Miller's gonna be your next judge member,
Oh,
starting
that'd
in
be
July.
great.
You love Anthony. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
And I said that.
She saw me as he was leaving.
I just learned how to pronounce your name. You can't leave us.
Did you-
Oh, yeah.
When did you take up Swedish?
I know, right?
Yeah.
Did you get your money? Anthony will be one,
No, I have.
but he, not every judge is willing to do child welfare.
So
Anthony has,
honestly,
not only did he agree to that assignment,
Nice.
and I had to do it on short notice with him, but he's signed up for it for another 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And he's been great. His lawyers, been a great neutral,
Okay.
and I kind of think that the judge
I do feel bad.
council members lead and let the judge. No, not till July.
To July, okay.
Not till
We
July.
haven't talked- Yeah. I just-
Not till July.
Oh, man.
So anyway,
Thank you. Nice to see you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I know. It's spring, right? I just wear some flowers. Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Hannah, how are you? One damn thing after another. Supposed to have an investiture of a new judge tomorrow, except he had an appendicitis today. So, yes, exactly. So, it's like canceling a wedding.
And you.
What's your left
Should we-
side? Yeah. It never happened.
Holly Sika, we got a quorum. We're after our time to start. Should we get started?
So was it muscular?
All right, 1 minute you shall have. Mr. O'Brien, how are you? Principal Connor, how are you? Good. We were talking about you at our Child's High School listening session.
7 years.
Yep, about all the innovative things that you're doing. Paul Mitchell was singing your praises like you wouldn't believe. It was a love fest. Very nice.
Probably for about 3 months.
I met a friend of yours last night,
Who's that?
but I can't remember his name.
That's
He's
a lot.
retired
Yeah,
judge.
that's a
His
lot of
wife's
work.
name
I
is
can't
Sam.
remember.
Charlie Dodson. Charles Dodson.
Good, so he's in the
Yeah,
hospital.
yeah. He's a great guy.
Yeah, he said the same about you.
Okay,
The
okay.
surgeons are much.
But it wasn't a radiating, wasn't a radiating thing, it was like, it didn't, it was moving, all right.
Short term.
Yeah, so he's there.
And
He's doing
they gave.
fantastic. Your people are.
But it helped though, right?
It did.
Yeah, that does
Yeah.
help.
It
It
did.
hurt.
I just found out they're rehabbing back. Yes.
Yeah, you'll prefer that, yeah.
I was ready for
Oh
it.
my God.
But with the
Yeah.
surgery we did on the
I
vertebrae,
understand. They did good though.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
Okay, that's what it was.
Yeah, we had
So-
rehearsed with them.
Well, Albert is a great doctor.
So the good part about it, had he not fallen, he would have never known he had the.
Chiquita, is there a Wi-Fi password?
Yes.
And you like it?
I love it.
Okay.
Oh,
So
good.
you talking about Tony?
Thank you.
Glad to hear about
About
that.
Tony?
Yeah.
Is Norman doing a good job over there?
They're doing a very good job. with it.
Okay, yeah, my phone is
I
not
keep
letting
getting
me.
Do my bathroom
Combine
now,
need
so
to
I
ask
didn't know about it.
Okay,
But when
thanks.
we're gonna
Oh,
do children's
they did a
services
great
as well.
job.
Or I can just have you look up what I need.
Cause I have.
That's
Holly Seeker, when you're ready to get started, you give me the high sign and we'll call it to order.
So I wore a shirt to wear my swag
That's
to remind
good.
her about children's services.
Yeah, we should get something.
We should get, and I'd buy it.
Yeah, I'll buy it.
You know, Paulie will let her
But
buy
I'll let you
it.
come
So-
by
Yeah.
and buy and take a look.
Buy it.
Okay, yeah, sure. All right.
Hey, Miss Liza.
Hey, everybody.
Mr. Rowe, can you hear me coming through the live stream? Can you give us a sound check to see if we can hear you?
Yes, Holly, this is Chris. I can hear you.
And we can hear you perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nicely done.
The church from we're ready to start.
Excellent. So at this time, I will call the Children's Services Council of Leon County Governing Council meeting, publicly noticed meeting for April 21, 22 at 2 p.m., starting on time, close enough, to order. Ms. Clay, would you call the roll?
Here.
Here.
Ms. Cummings?
Here.
Sandra Glenn.
Ms. Glenn? Judge Stroshem,
Present.
Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Jones,
Present.
Mr. O'Brien,
Here.
Ms. Connor, Mr. Hannah, Judge Stroshem.
Very well. Do we have a quorum?
We do have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So next item on the agenda,
I move approval of the agenda.
agenda's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion, objection, corrections, alterations, deletions? Seeing no takers, will show the agenda approved.
I move approval of the minutes.
Minutes have been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
And seconded by Ms. We're going to go with Commissioner Cummings. Got the second. Any objections, corrections, discussion of the minutes? Seeing none, we'll show the minutes approved.
If I may, with this
Please.
same, you saw how quickly we did that. I would like for us to consider moving to a consent agenda format such that things like the agenda, the minutes, the executive director's report, things that are reoccurring information that we can get in advance, read. Because I think so some of the items don't require any discussion, doesn't require us going into the documents. And with the guidance of the chair and the executive director, that we come up for future reference, consent agenda, the treasurer's report, other things. And then if those items under consent require any further explanation, it can occur outside of the public meeting just to make our meetings more efficient, because so that we can save time.
Excellent. So with your permission, Mr. Jones, is that okay if we ask Executive Director Green to bring us back a proposal at our next meeting?
Certainly.
Ms. Green, is that something that you can bring to us next time?
Yes, I'll check with the general counsel just to make sure we don't have any problems with that.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Thank you for that, Mr. Jones. Appreciate it. Next is general public comment. So we've got, I think, 5 public comment periods on this agenda. The way public comment works in Florida open meetings is there's a general public comment period at the beginning. We try to limit our comments to 2 or 3 minutes, I think, something like that. We honestly, unless it gets out of hand, we don't take real care with that. But and then every time we vote on something, there's also an opportunity for public comment. So we're going to be voting today on what I'm going to call expedited funding options. We're going to be voting on the enterprise software solution. We're going to be voting on the treasurer's report, assuming that the treasurer arrives. We're going to be voting on the staff purchasing card. So every time we have something coming up for a vote on the agenda, the public does have an opportunity to comment. We do ask that you fill out a comment card, but if we get into some place and you haven't filled out a comment card, we're not so overwhelmed that or such legalistic sticklers that we're going to prevent anybody from being heard. So if at any point you want to make a comment, just let Ms. Green, Executive Director Green, or Ms. McPhail know, or Ms. Clay know, and we will make certain that everybody gets an opportunity to be heard. Ms. Clay, do we have any comment cards that have been submitted?
There's no public comment, Your Honor.
Very well. Thank you so much for that. At this time, we'll recognize Ms. Green for the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll move through this very quickly. So you will see the approved amended budget in your packet. We will be using that starting in April for the April financials. We have rescheduled the presentation on Hope Florida Care Navigation and the DCF restructuring for May. You will also have in your packet an updated floor plan for the space that we will be renting. I am also happy to say that the owner is giving us in-kind space, which will allow us to have our council meetings and committee meetings all at our office.
Oh, wow.
Ms. Clay, if I could just get you to recognize Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Hannah both here. We have the full council present.
So we're very happy about that.
What you say, we're going to be able to have our meetings at our space?
We will.
Okay.
I am working on the DFO position description. Quite frankly, just with everything going on, I wasn't able to get that done and listed, but we will get that position posted next week. The Q2 report has been submitted to Leon County as required by ordinance. Wanted to let you know, we are partnering with Second Harvest and Leon County Human Services. You'll see a schedule in your packet of neighborhood meetings that we will be there to get input from the community. And so this is another strategy that we're using to try to continue to get community input. So you'll see some dates and times there. Please feel free to attend, but you need to let us know that you will be there. We also, I was able to have a conversation with Council Member Glenn, Dr. Glenn. And as her husband is a public school teacher, she thought that it would be great for us to have teacher conversations so that we can get information from them on things that students would share with them and may not share in open forums. Councilmember Glenn, I'd like to give you just a minute if you want to just address that very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. One of the reasons why this came to my mind was because we attended the children's session that we had at I think it was the Walker Ford Center. And I found out after that meeting, I thought it was, very engaging and the students were forthright, but I found out after that meeting that there were 6 kids in that room that were homeless. And I was completely shocked by that. I had no idea, based on the conversation that we had with them, that many children were homeless. And then I thought, maybe those kids don't quite understand the situation that they're in. I know that I didn't realize our family's economic situation until I got to college. I just thought that's the way everybody lived. So I thought that I think the people that are close to these children that really understand what's happening are the teachers. These are the people that are connected with them every day. They know when they're homeless, they know when there are hunger situations. And these are things that the children may not be comfortable sharing or not even aware. They live with these rose-colored glasses. So if we could have an opportunity for teachers around the county to really talk about what they're hearing from the kids, what they see, I think that would be very insightful because I thought we could get that out of the kids. I just don't think we can always get exactly what we need out of the children. So that's what made me bring that up.
Ms. Green, maybe we can get,
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna ask, maybe Principal Connor and Superintendent Hannah could just weigh in if they think this is seems like a good idea.
I think it's very true. When you talked about the kids that are homeless, there are children at our school that live that life, but I could tell you story after story, but you wouldn't necessarily hear that from a teenager or a middle schooler that would share that. So I think a good voice would come from the teachers. I think that's a great idea.
Mr. Henry, what do you?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I was good to you. Bringing that forward, I guess I'm still trying to understand our way of operating and how we want to go about this. And I didn't want our schools particularly training things. Anyway, so I think it's a great idea. We'd be one to figure out, you know, what age groups and which teachers are breaking down meeting or however you want that to look.
Mr. Jones.
If I may, only thing I would also suggest is that we get teachers from across the expanse and breadth of our service area. So that would mean we would also include providers of early learning services, or, I mean, to connect with their faculty may be a little more, require a little more detail or nuance, but to talk with providers, existing providers, particularly those who are already possibly engaged with our early learning initiatives with the school district, to the discussion with teachers. But a very, very good idea.
Mr. Mitchell.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Dr. Glenn, I agree. What a fantastic idea. I would add that in many of the schools, there is I'm going to use the term somewhat globally, but a medical professional, sometimes a mental health person that may do part-time work there. If there is a way, I mean, if you think about our last meeting at Childs, where we focused so heavily on mental health, and if there's a way that we could include also the mental health professionals. And the final point I'll make is, at that same meeting, remember the young boy Bailey who was so animated, and I found out afterwards when Sika asked the question, do you feel safe in your neighborhood? Who feels safe? Yeah. And I watched Bailey raise his hand, right? Oh, yeah, he feels safe. I stayed afterwards, and Miss Connie, who runs it, is the one who takes him home. He actually lives in Bainbridge, in a trap house. Is that what it's a drug house? So he raised his hand, I feel safe, and he lives in a drug house, and he leaves when things get a little, I think every day at a drug house is bad, but when they get really bad, to go to Miss Connie's house. So I think your point about you think everything, it's normal, so you think it's safe, like nail hit right on head. So thank you.
Good, good. Well, I think we have consensus.
Very.
Mr. Hannah, of course.
All of our schools have social workers, or they share social workers. I think Farming probably had one that was you one day a week. And so they have feet on the ground, listening to teachers, and then meeting with students and families. So they would probably be, instead of us trying to figure out 2,000 teachers, what that looks like, have a core cadre of social workers and works with all the students in all of our schools.
Sure.
So they would have a good working knowledge of all of their needs. And now, as far as other programs, some of the figure out how to engage with them. I know as far as our school system, social workers or referrals from the principal or from teachers, they realize.
Are you aggregating that information? How is that information being used? Because that's a data-rich environment. You could really figure out a lot of stuff through all of that.
I need to get, let me get, I don't want to. Let me get with this guy who is our director of student services and oversees all our however we want to make that work, I can figure out who has to.
Such a
If-
And
if
may I
I'm-
add- oh,
I'm sorry, after you, ma'am.
May I add one step further? Our guidance counselors are usually the ones that funnel that information to our social workers. So that might be the group, because oftentimes some things can be solved at the school level where we don't have to go to the social worker, and that's the next step. So maybe all of the guidance counselors would be a good.
Yeah, Kim oversees both of those.
I didn't realize that.
You officially.
If I may offer this, Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir, Mr.
is
Council.
that in cooperation with her idea, I don't know if we want to use our meeting. I've just talked about the length of our meeting. I like these moments where we take aside to have these separate conversations in our community, to invite other stakeholders to witness. The public is involved as we're being informed. And I hope that we'll be open to other stakeholder groups. These conversations that we've been having have certainly been enlightening. So that would be my only recommendation, not this meeting, but in our continuing conversation.
So Ms. Green, does that give you some direction?
That gives me great direction. And I think our plan, when we talked about it with the staff, was looking at after the school year, because we didn't want to add something else onto our school team members' plate, but rather work with that. So we'll work with the school district, Dr. Gale, and whomever, Kim Scott, whomever it is we need to work with. So thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Glenn, for bringing that up. The last thing I will say is that you will be happy to know that CSC will be represented at Kids Fest on Saturday, April 30th, at the Healthy Start Health and Wellness Fair at Jay Gaither on April 30th, at the Family Resource Expo that will be at the ACE Center, Adult Community Education on May 12th, and during the Soul of the South Side on Saturday, May 21st. So that brings an end to my report. And then we've got some other meeting dates that are there in your packet. So if there are no questions, I'll turn it back over.
Any questions for the executive director? Seeing none, we will move on to the scariest item on the agenda, the 2022-23 draft budget development, and the scariest phrase, trim hearing schedule. Ms. Green, you are
Yeah.
recognized.
Thank you, Chair. And in the words of the actor from the movie Life with Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence, don't be scared. This is a part of our job that we have to do. So you will see a draft schedule for our budget formation for the next fiscal year 22-23, as well as proposed dates for our trim hearings. We will have two. We are working in concert with the school board, the school district, as well as Leon County, to ensure that we are following the statute and that our hearings come after theirs. So as soon as we get this shored up, we will probably send this out to you and ask each of you individually, because we want to make sure we don't have any conflicts. But you can take this with you, look at it. If there's something that does not make sense, please feel free to let us know. And Judge, I turn it back over to you.
Very good. And I know we developed really good relationships. Ted and Holly, before your time, developed really good relationships. And I know you'll rely on Holly's institutional memory. We now have an institutional memory. You're it. And for that, and makes me nervous. Any comments on the draft budget development and trim hearing schedule? Very good. Seeing no takers. Bring us to the joyful part of our agenda, the committees and reports. And something we've been eager to do from day one. The Program Services Committee, Dr. Glenn, you're recognized.
Thank you so very much. So I think we've all been waiting for this particular day. This is an opportunity for us to hear the results of the gap analysis report and the needs assessment that's been done over the last several months. I do want to call your attention to page 12 inside our packets. This is a summary of the status updates of all of the deliverables that we have asked QQ to do. So if you look at that table that's on page 12, you have all of the deliverables, you see the due dates, and then the staff was nice enough to give you all a status update as to where we are with all of these. You can see where we are right here in mid-April. We are at the point where we should be receiving the final comprehensive programs inventory and also the defining opportunities. I'm sorry. for funding A, the expedited funding. So the program's inventory is not completely finished. We are still in the process of capturing that information and still working with the partners within the community. So that is something that is ongoing, but we do have a current draft as to where we are right now. And we do have the recommendations for funding options A, which you're going to get to hear from Dr. Williams in just a few minutes. What I do want to remind you all that we should be receiving the final report in June. So be on the lookout. What you're going to hear is our current status of that report, but we will be getting the final gap analysis and the final funding options for funding options B in June. One other thing too, I want to remind you all, the needs assessment that we have, this is just our first needs assessment. And I think I had to wrap my mind around that because I thought the needs assessment was going to be one and done. Like, you know, we're going to do a needs assessment and we're going to know all of the needs across Leon County and we're going to solve the world by, you know, funding all these different programs. But we need more information. You know, we need more data. We need more information coming in from the community. So this is round one of our needs assessment, and we will continue to have more opportunities to get more data, just like what we just talked about by connecting with the school board, you know, individuals and having more community forums, different ways of getting more information that will inform our needs assessment. So I want to remind everybody about that. That process will be ongoing. We will continuously engage the community. And the staff is currently working on a community engagement strategy plan. And I'm really looking forward to when that's done, because that's something that we're going to have to be doing on a regular basis. We're going to lose the services of QQ in a couple of months. And they've done a significant amount of work for us, but I do think they've put us in a good place to give us the data that we have now and allow us to continue collecting data as we go along. Our committee has had a wonderful meeting on April the 7th, and as some of you were able to join that meeting. When we met on April 7th, we received the draft gap analysis report and the draft expedited funding options that QQ has prepared for us. We do want the council members, we want all of the council members to be involved with these conversations, and not just the programs committee, the Program Services Committee. So one thing that we are recommending is that we have a workshop. So that's going to be outside of these meetings here, but have a workshop where the full council can come to this workshop and really discuss some of the things that we're seeing inside these reports, and then really, make some decisions around prioritizing what needs to happen, especially around the fall. So I want everybody to not feel as if you're left out because you're not a part of the Program Services Committee. These are council decisions, and we do think that having the workshop will allow for that opportunity.
Fantastic.
Oh, cool. Glad you're pleased to hear that. Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. Okay, I appreciate that. All right, with that, I am going to introduce Dr. Williams. Sandra, if you could please take the floor and walk us through the findings of the gap analysis. One thing that we promised Dr. Williams is that she will have 30 uninterrupted minutes for her report. And then when she's done, then we'll open it up for questions.
Uninterrupted?
Uninterrupted, Mr. Jones, sorry.
Not likely.
We're going to try.
I'm putting the stopwatch.
And we do have a copy of the slides in our packet if you want to follow along. Thank you.
Testing. Okay. I was just thanking you all for trying your best to not jump in, but I completely understand, because when you see data and you're hearing some of the findings, you're like excited to sort of jump in. So please feel free to share some of your thoughts after. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so today I'm going to focus on the methodology that we used in order to conduct the gap analysis. And I'll share, I'm going to focus on the findings for today. We'll touch on funding options A. I don't think we'll have as much time for the CPI and IPI review, but as Dr. Glenn just shared, know that that is still a work in progress, but I feel like we're in a really great place. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going to go over this really briefly because you guys already know the priority areas that were identified by the needs assessments with success in school and life, healthy children, youth, and families, stable and nurturing families and communities. And within those domains, we have some subdomains: school readiness, school age support, physical and mental health, youth development, housing stability, food stability, and enhanced caregivers. So know that the work that we did was really using that framework. So even as we thought about developing the items for the focus group, the items for the survey, this was all really grounded around your priority areas. 2 slides down. Okay. There we go. Okay, perfect. So the gap analysis report really had 3 major aims. And one, obviously, is to identify the needs, the conditions, and the assets of the community. A second was to analyze access and delivery of services for children, youth, and families. And really to provide you all with some findings so that you can now make some very important decisions. I always say that towards the end of a needs assessment, we do all of this work and then we pass on the work to you all because there's a lot more work to be done. One of is making decisions as it relates to funding, but also making sure that you still have a connection with the community as it relates to their needs, their current needs and what's coming. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I really want to spend some time talking about the methodology. So triangulation of data sources is really the methodology that we employed. And this methodology is important in that it is seen as a best practice in community research, as well as in needs assessments. And so really what that means is that we're not going to use one data source in order to tell the story, that we really are going to depend on a number of data sources from different perspectives to be able to provide a more comprehensive picture in terms of what the needs are. So we break that up in terms of quantitative and qualitative research. So that's kind of where we got the QQ from, by the way. I thought I'd throw that in there. So the quantitative piece really is focusing on data that is quantifiable, right? So we spent a lot of time looking at secondary data sources, and those data sources were many. We're talking about census data, Florida Department of Education data, DJJ data, the Alice report, Florida charts, just to name a few. And so when you see just secondary data sources, know that that includes a number of data sources that we're using, again, to triangulate and get a better picture of what's going on. In addition to that, the secondary data sources, we also developed a community needs assessment survey. This was to allow us to get some perception of the community. And so that included really trying to get folks to be able to complete surveys that really tapped into their perceptions around access to services, around their perceptions of whether there are any gaps, any needs. And so we deployed that survey, and I had the privilege of actually going out myself and really in person talking to folks and helping them through completing that survey. So that was great for me and my team to go to different areas throughout the county, really trying to get folks to complete the survey. So we did do that as well. So now we just talked about the quantitative data. So we had the secondary data sources that I just mentioned earlier, and then the community needs assessment data. So the qualitative data is really our chance to complement the secondary data sources with some more contextual information through focus groups. And so with the qualitative data, what we did was we conducted a number of focus groups with parents, with youth, as well as providers. Again, because I love qualitative research, I love quantitative as well, but I like to hear firsthand from parents, from youth, from providers, their thoughts around their perceptions as it relates to needs. And so I did conduct a majority of the focus groups along with some of my colleagues and special subject matter experts. There you go. And so we added that qualitative piece again, because sometimes you'll see numbers from just secondary data sources, but it doesn't really tell you the why. It doesn't tell you the story behind it. It doesn't tell you the barriers or experiences that parents, youth, and others are experiencing. So that qualitative piece adds to the data. So I say all this to say that as we talk about the findings, know that we employ this data triangulation because we don't want to make statements just based on focus groups. We don't want to make statements just based on the secondary data, the same as we don't want to make statements just based on the needs assessment. And what you'll find is that when we started to look at the data, what was exciting, and I'm jumping to the findings, but what was exciting is that there was great alignment. And what that means is, so when we looked at secondary data sources that talked about a particular phenomenon that's happening, we looked to see, well, was that supported by the focus group findings? So if the parents said that this was a barrier for them, did the providers also echo that same sentiment? And we did find that really in mainly, I would say almost all the domains, there was alignment. And so you'll see in the report where we talk about secondary data is showing us this. And then we say this is supported by the focus group data. And then we say, well, providers also stated. And what we tried to do is, I know you weren't in the room and you couldn't be there in the focus groups, but we wanted to include some of the quotes because sometimes it's, you kind of have to hear it from their mouths to be really able to grasp what's happening. And so next slide, where are we? Okay, so I am going to jump in now. So when we look at let's focus just on the community needs assessment data. I wanted to give you sort of a breakdown of who responded, the demographics for that. We had about a half split between 45% of the respondents identified as Black, 47% identified as white. We had about 8% identifying as Hispanic. And when we looked at income, that was one of the items, we had about 11.5% that reported making under 20,000 annually. The medium income bracket for respondents was between 20 and 40,000. I have this little note there on the side that talks about the sample size of 555. Note that we hit about 20 zip codes. And if it was up to me, I would keep that survey on for another 2 to 3 months, but we really had to close it because we had some great deadlines we had to meet for you all. So we did extend the survey as much as we possibly could. It's not to say that this is not something you guys can again, distribute in another year or so to see if the perceptions have changed any, but we included that note there as it relates to the power analysis, because many times when we're working with a number of communities, they kind of want to see, we want to see 5,000 people responded. And if any of you all are sort of familiar with survey research and know how difficult it is really to get folks to come out, we were excited for the 555 because it allowed us to determine whether there were any statistically significant differences across the respondents. What that means is if we found a finding, perhaps some, a group of folks reported they did not feel, but they felt that there was access to after-school programming. When you have a large enough sample size, it allows you to look to see whether that response differed as it relates to zip code, as it relates to race and ethnicity, as it relates to income. When the sample size is small, you can't make those assumptions because you just don't have enough statistical power. So we were happy to see that we had enough statistical power because we did want to run the data across ethnicity, race, income, zip code to see if there were any differences. Okay, jumping to the findings. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so let's begin with school readiness. When we look at responses related to early childhood and education services, we see that between 55 to 59% had favorable perceptions regarding access and affordability of early childhood programs. The secondary data indicates that as of about fall 2020, roughly 57% of entering kindergarten students across the state of Florida scored ready for kindergarten. When we looked at Leon County, a slightly higher proportion scored ready for kindergarten at close to 62%. And that was actually up from 2017. So again, in the report, you'll see how we're really, again, trying to triangulate. We're trying to show you secondary data, and then we're also trying to show you some of the perceptions of the community. Next slide. You will notice that there's a star in some of the items, and that is when we look to see if there were any statistical significantly differences as it relates to the response. So what that means is while one, either one zip code or one group is reporting in one way, we found that there was a statistically significant difference as it relates to another group. And so let me kind of share a little bit more about that, or hopefully make that a little bit more clear. So when we look at the data regarding access, we see that folks are reporting that there are enough programs that focus on basic educational needs. We see about 59 to 77% respectively for these two items. So for these two items, there was significant variability in the case by racial group, which means Black or African American respondents reported weaker attitudes in this response item. So you'll find that we might, sure, Black and or African American respondents reported having weaker attitudes as it relates to those two items.
Weaker meaning less favorable?
Less favorable.
Oh.
So we do that because we want to look in many different ways. Sometimes we might find that there may be a difference as it relates to zip code. Sometimes you might find that there might be a difference as it relates to income. And so whenever we found a statistically significant difference for a particular item, we noted that in the report so that you can just, consider exploring that a little bit more. Okay, next slide, please. So when we look at out of school time, we see here that attitudes are quite bit less favorable. We have a lot more disagreement, especially high levels of disagreement in the areas of affordable access to after school programming for youth ages 14 to 17. And we also see that on average, it's still a little bit more negative. It's less negative. I don't want to use the word negative. Let me change that. It's less favorable when we think about how folks were reporting about the overall quality of education. And so this was another instance where the survey data is indicating that parents are saying there aren't as much access to after school programming, summer programming. And then we heard that again with the focus group. So speaking with parents and speaking with youth, they also echoed that same sentiment. Okay, healthy children, youth, and families. So here we're focusing on physical and mental health. Again, you see two stars there again, indicating that there might have been some significant difference there. Okay, so here we find that the first three items, attitudes here are relatively positive as it relates to prenatal and perinatal health care. We can see that the majority of respondents agreed. For example, mothers felt that they have access to quality prenatal care and that the quality of care during delivery is also available. And that said, again, the first two items, we did find some significant variability. Okay, youth development, thank you. So again, we see there was substantial disagreement with these items as it relates to services that focus on occupational skills, particularly for youth in Leon County, not enough services, again, for career pathways for youth. This is echoed once again in not only the focus groups with the parents, but as well with the providers. So I kind of rushed over that, but keep in mind that we also had focus groups with providers where we asked them similar questions as it relates to what they thought were the needs for children, youth, and families. And so this was also echoed at both, actually all three, the youth, the parent, and the providers. So that's, again, another indication that as you're thinking about support services for youth development, you can keep this in mind. So when it comes to housing, we can see some variability in the responses across the different items. You see again, 2 stars indicating that there were significant differences as it relates to one of the categories I mentioned earlier. For the first one, you can see it's focused on a good place to live, right? We have the majority of folks reporting that their neighborhood was a good place to live. So when you see that star, that means that there was actually, for this one, it was across zip codes. There was variability in terms of the way folks responded, depending on where their zip code is. So if you're certain zip codes did not quite feel that they were living, the place where they live is a good place to live. So that's another way where you're thinking about, are there differences as it relates to the needs and services? So those significant findings really speak to some disparity that might be operating. So whether or not the degree to which location, let's see, in my neighborhood housing is affordable, I have to tell you, this almost mirrors the majority of communities that we do this work in, very similar responses, and that it's just not as affordable as we would like. And we included some data as it relates to the Alice report in the under the secondary data. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about housing services. We did find that based on what we heard, that folks would benefit from just more access to services to help them as it relates to housing. I know we can't, housing is always a tough one. Later on, not now, but later on, we're kind of talk about how, how are folks kind of tackling housing, because it really is an issue for just the state of Florida, and something that obviously a CSC couldn't do alone. Okay. So this is additionally more items as it relates to housing. The first one we see is largely positive views about housing needs of children. Although we found that there was some variability as it relates to zip code and how favorable people responded to this item. I didn't include the nitty-gritty details of the comparisons, but know that in the report, that information is there in the event you guys are interested in learning more about which of these zip codes. No, oh, you're ahead of the game, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about food stability. We see that the attitudes are relatively positive across the first 3 items, that the basic food needs of children are met, and that they have access to free and nutritious meals in the summer and during school. There is substantial disagreement in the case of nutritious meals during school. We see about 47% disagreeing with that item. So there is some, this thought about how we could explore that a little bit more. Just from my interactions in the focus groups, one of the things that did come up was just the barriers to transportation to get to a food bank, transportation to be able, because, it might be available, but they face some barriers just getting there. So we'll add a little bit in the final as it relates to transportation and how that can serve as a barrier to some of the services. Okay, and that was the last slide on the findings. I almost want to stop, I really do. I want to stop and hear everyone's perception, but I'm, okay. Let's pause for a second. I just want to make sure if, I don't want to use up my time for the funding options A, but I wanted to stop for a moment just to at least allow for some questions or comments or thoughts. I know some of you had the privilege of attending some of the community engagements, so I'd love to hear from you. Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Jones. Yes, thank you. I appreciate your,
Thank you. Just want to
Hello.
remind everyone to lean in, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I am, as this information is dissected by us to inform recommendations to us, I'm glad that we're able to see what may be a more accurate representation, particularly of the targeted working poor families that we serve. I am concerned that the sample that we have is perhaps not entirely indicative of what we know is a reality as expressed to us in other documents of similar nature that inform our work. In our district, we would not have favorable responses about the availability of childcare or the accessibility of prenatal care from our families, from the families that we ultimately will serve, as seen in this sampling. So your willingness to be able to talk about less favorable responses from particularly the targeted groups who the Children's Services Council will ultimately serve, I think is important. I know that, and I appreciate the distinction between quantitative and qualitative data, right? Mr. O'Brien, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on his board of trustees, right? But I know that our hospital has been very responsive to what we know had been a health crisis of the great disparity in infant mortality here in the smartest community, one of the smartest communities in the country, and yet poor working class families were dealing with the trauma of infant mortality and infant death. And that's why we expanded our footprint of the hospital to go into Gadsden County where it was most prevalent in an effort to mitigate that. But it still persists for families the trauma of that, particularly when we find out that the issue of prenatal care, when a great number of our children who are dying, the infant mortality rate is even exacerbated more by in utero deaths from domestic violence found in homes. And then we send those same children to school, those same children who've witnessed these types of horrors, to teach them. So I wonder I just hope that when we dissect this quantitative data, that we're able to find I don't want to say the nugget, but the information that is truly emblematic of the persons who we are ultimately charged to serve. Because this has not quite reflected what we know to be a legitimate reality for working class families in our community. So being able to make that distinction, I think, is important. I know this is the beginning of the process as described by our chair, but as I was looking at these numbers, and I then go back to the sample that you gave us, right? 45% Black, 47% white, and then the median income bracket of $20,000 to $40,000. I just want to make certain that working poor, and I'm not talking about even by color, but working poor, right? Their needs that their numbers will still be able to inform us, although we don't see that necessarily in these findings.
Yes, no, thank you for that. I just want to highlight again, if you remember, I started off by saying, be careful in that it's data triangulation. So there's a lot of data in the report that's from secondary data sources that's not from the community survey. And I wanted to also add that, we included the community survey because we just wanted to get sort of some perceptions around that. It's complemented by secondary data. So the same secondary data that you all used as it relates to infant mortality, that's included in the report as well. Yes, please.
Ms. McFadden, you're recognized.
I think that you're framing it around an equity issue is really good with the starring, but because I would recommend perhaps for public consumption that instead of the stars, there be an annotation with down below what those stars mean, because that is certainly not clear. And when I look at the document, it almost makes it seem like the stars are what you want to focus on.
Yes, good
And that's
news.
actually not accurate. I mean, if you were going to star something, it would probably be the things that people had the most challenges with, the mental health and the homelessness, et cetera. So I know everything we do goes out publicly, and
I hear ya.
and I just want to make a suggestion that we clarify the intent there.
Absolutely. And we can certainly make that change in the PowerPoint. Know that in the actual report, you'll likely see more of an asterisk indicating that it was statistically significant, which is in line with most research.
Outstanding. Mr. O'Brien.
So looking at this is more perception information, which is important. It's important for us to understand the perceptions because in many cases, those are realities. But again, it's a triangulation approach. So when I look at this, it looks like, for example, school readiness is we're doing pretty well. But from a standpoint, how do we measure school readiness as far as actual true measurements? I mean, I don't know what the measure is, but how do we measure school readiness, kids going into kindergarten?
Maybe Dr. Williams, you can talk about your secondary sources for that.
Sure. But
Because the perception is not that bad. The perception, they look at those numbers, and goes, oh, they're not that far off. But I don't think our third grade reading scores would reflect that because they're already behind.
I'm
You
going
want
to
a
jump
member
in.
of your team? I didn't know if a member of your team wanted to jump in to answer from the KOM, that we define it in the KOM.
Yeah,
Sure.
From perception to actual true measurement data,
Mhm.
are there some gaps?
Yeah. So let me go ahead and pass that question over to Spencer, our statistician.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can, and I'm going to make you bigger in just one moment.
Great, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Thanks. I couldn't hear that question too well, but I did hear the bit about how are we determining kindergarten readiness. And for the aspect that comes from secondary data, this is using the Early Star literacy assessment, which is the standard that's used across the state of Florida to look at kindergarten readiness. It's used in schools all across the state. And then in the community survey that we conducted, we did not specify for them to think about that particular measure, just for them to think more broadly about their feelings towards kindergarten readiness.
Does that answer it, Mark?
Yeah. So we do have information, right?
Sure. And I think something you said raises an interesting question, which is that if they seem to be starting off on average on a strong footing, but we do see these disparities and things popping up by third grade, then there's certainly stuff to dig into there.
Mr. Hannah, does that seem consistent?
I mean, I think there was some debate. I have my director of early childhood here with us. I don't know that we really want to get into this whole discussion about how we define kindergarten readiness versus data and testing model that they are reporting on. I really process that a little more.
And if I may, remember, we will be workshopping this to get more into allowing that kind of information to come forward.
So I do have a question, and I may have missed something, so I apologize. There's a sampling of 555 individuals, correct? And we're seeing the results and how those 555 individuals feel about each one of those questions. Is that correct?
Correct.
I see you've broken down the 555 individuals by race and economic status. But are there any other? First, I didn't know we had 20 zip codes in the honestly. But who, other than that, can you tell us who these people are? Are they parents? Are they grandparents? Are they? What is their age range? What other factors? And how did we reach out to these people? Did we call on the phone? Other than their race and their income level, what were the other mitigating factors that targeted them to be included in this work?
Sure, great question. So the actual survey link was distributed to, I believe, all school district parents. So we use that platform. In addition to that, as I stated, we still circulated that link throughout the partners. And the in-person is what I'm referring to when I said we were out there physically meeting with folks to ask them to complete the survey face-to-face. So there were a number of different mediums in which parents can access the survey. As it relates to the demographic, we didn't include everything on this slide. In the actual report, it's typically what's collected under demographic information. You're talking about SES, race, ethnicity, gender. I'm trying to think of offhand. It's really that boilerplate when you think about demographics that's included. So it's not noted here in the PowerPoint, but in the report, we do include all of the demographics.
So we obviously did a really good job considering we have 60,000 parents, 500 of those 60,000 could not respond. Is that what we're saying, basically?
Yes.
I just want to comment on that too. Mr. Hannah, I saw the link on WCTV or one of those news stations. I mean, so they did have it on the morning show. So I did see it go out on the TV. And then I know I personally posted it on Nextdoor to all of the people in my community to do it. And then I sent the link to my entire choir. So it's like, ladies, here's this link for the community survey. I need you all to do it. So I did because I knew we needed more responses, and Holly brought that up at one of our last meetings. So that's why I want us to continue to do this, to get more responses, because I do think we can get more people, but I think it's going to have to be more collective. And I think the community has got to understand who we are. Because a lot of people's like, what is this for again, Xandra? I'm not quite sure. And once I explained, it's like, oh, okay, we'll do the survey. But that's how I was able to get some of my connections to take the survey.
And if I can add to that statement, even as we were really hoping that through the school district database that more parents.
I think it was called Peach Jar, where we were able to post it on that. But I think it goes back to what Dr. Glenn just said, that do they click on it because they don't know who we are or not?
So that was one route, but I wanted to add that when we were doing it in person, I had to spend some time just educating folks, like who is CSC and what do they hear about before they would even feel comfortable completing the survey. So keep in mind that there is just not knowing who the organization is because it's so fairly new, it's going to limit the responses. I can almost guarantee that after a year of folks really knowing about CSC, that you'll find different results when you do some outreach to get perceptions.
Thanks so much. Any other questions for Dr. Williams? Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you. Other than Dr. Glenn's choir, which I'm sure
I tried.
Yeah, good for you.
We were putting all our bets with the school district, though. Thank you, though, Dr. Glenn.
I'm curious about the number of, so the same one that I filled out, that survey, that was the one you also went door to door and got people to sit down with you, and once they understood who the Children's Services Council felt comfortable responding, and they took the same survey I did.
Correct.
What is the difference in numbers of respondents that you got physically, like that you and your team got, versus those who were me and Dr. Glenn's choir?
Yeah, I'd have to look to be sure. I want to say, this is really just based on my memory, that we had about maybe 200. Well, I take it back. I have to go back. And the reason I say that is when we did it in person, they were still using the link and they were still using our tablets. Gotcha. And so I would have to go back and look. I know we did coded in person versus online, so I can get you that information. I don't want to say it off the top.
And this was really, that was a lead up to my real question, which is, was there a difference? Was there a significant difference between the responses you got from the people who performed the survey online versus the ones that did it in person? And as I look at, all of the numbers, look at seems like of the 555, there's really, I mean, even though there's some that have the stars, and I agree with Ms. McFadden, it leads you to look there as though that's the problem, and I don't think it is. But it seems like the 555, as a rule, we're pretty happy. There are a couple of issues that, but felt okay about the services that are being delivered and the needs being met. Still some, we have much to do before we sleep, but I was curious if you did 200 in person and 400 or 355 online, were the 200 the ones that were most unhappy, or did they look just like the others in terms of their responses?
Yeah, I would have to check, but I think what you're hypothesizing is that if they completed it on their own, their responses would somehow be different as opposed to in person. Is that what?
Or maybe it's just the sample.
Whether
the sample.
they're coming to you
it's
versus
different.
you're going to them.
Mhm.
Coming to you, they have a axe to grind, right?
Yeah, I just.
Versus those, if you're just approaching them, maybe just, okay, let me think about this. Here's
Yeah,
how
we
I
can
feel.
certainly go back and take a look to see. And then again, I do want to, I know I keep overstating it, but I do want to state, remember that you still have the secondary data that points to if there are any differences across a number of these variables. And this is just, again, to supplement. I would say that, many times when we looked at the survey data, the secondary data again, and the focus groups, there really was alignment. And so things that come up in the report as an identified need, I feel strongly that they really are an identified need.
Mr. Chairman, one just follow-up question, and that you kind of got to. I wasn't really sure what I was hypothesizing. I just felt like I wanted to ask that question because the follow-up question is in terms of all of the secondary data sources that were utilized, was there, same question, a difference between what we're finding in the data that Mr. Jones and Superintendent Hannah see at the school district and the 555 responses, or were they pretty much, sort of along the same lines?
Yeah, and I'm not just trying to throw some kudos out to the team, but one thing I think they did really well, particularly Dr. Dudley, as he was writing that piece, was making the connection between the secondary data and the community survey data. And if there was anything that appeared to be in misalignment, it was noted. I don't remember much of anything being in misalignment. That's why I'm saying that. But I think your question is a great research question. And that is there a difference when folks are completing a survey in person via when they're in their separate rooms?
Gotcha.
Great question, but we can certainly do some analysis, some quick analysis.
Mr.
to
Chair,
answer that.
I know the time, I know we've got a great deal more to discuss. What I will say, and I'll go back to what I said at the very beginning, are being able to dissect this information, most specifically in those target demographics and where we know the footprint is greatest for our working class poor in 32301, 32304, 32310, right? Being able to dissect that same data from regarding some of these issues, you're saying that you've already identified that you're able to do that, to be able to give us a more accurate representation of the effects or the opinions of our targeted population. Because as it stands here presently, these Mayberry numbers do not reflect Leon County entirely. But if you're able to dissect and go down into those target areas where we're talking about where working class populations, that will help to inform our priorities, where we know that the people where their voices can be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why that's only thing I'm asking that we're able to do.
Absolutely.
Ultimately, Dr. Glenn, when we talk about identifying needs, is that we'll be able to dissect these numbers and be able to go to the heart of the matter and be able to hear the voices, right, of the persons who we are ultimately want to provide service.
I do want to add too that keep in mind, I didn't necessarily focus so much, but do know that there were folks who indicated disagreement with some of the items that I shared here. I tried to make it a little bit more broad that if we're finding that a little over half agreed, know that that means that there are some who also disagreed, and that might be related to the comment that you just made.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Outstanding. So
Okay.
Not done. She has to do the.
Oh,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
I thought he was I thought he was preparing me for the next part. Okay.
Work to go. She paused. I was like, uh-oh.
As Dr. Williams goes through this next part, her slides are primarily going to reflect funding options A. There's a version in your packet starting like the actual in the packet starting around page like 14 or 15, something around there. That's going to have them bigger so that you can see it. And it includes the zip codes, which I think goes to Mr. Jones's point as she goes forward. So I just wanted to bring your attention to maybe not pay attention to what's on the screen, but actually look in what's in your hardcore packet.
excellent.
In color.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, so what we did here is we included a number of columns to sort of really summarize a lot of data. As you,
Sorry.
yes,
Will you
please.
please tell them what you're about to go over? Because I think
Oh,
it's important that they
so
understand what this
sorry.
is.
I'm so sorry. So we're now going to have a discussion as it relates to funding options A, which is the expedited funding options, and they're just options based on what we have found in the data. So know that I do say options. That first column kind of brings you back to some of the identified gaps that were noted in the gap analysis report. That second column will point to some possible short-term investments that can be considered. The third column, which is the population, it talks about if there are any population considerations that you guys would need to make as you're thinking about the funding strategy. The next column, programmatic requirements, as you're thinking about moving into really a request for proposal, or as you're just thinking about what are some requirements that you're going to put in place for folks that could potentially be doing some of this work. We included that there. We included it's an estimated cost, just to give you, some data to work on as it relates to that. And then that last column is related to key outcome measures. So really, what are some of the benefits that we can reap from implementing funding in this particular domain? So the first one that we have is school age supports. Some of the identified gaps, as you can see here in that column. It's okay.
School readiness.
School readiness first, yeah.
Sorry.
Babies first.
The baby. Voila. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so I don't think I'll be able to go through every single domain, but know that I'm gonna just try to give you guys an overview. My words are moving faster. An overview so that you guys can at least engage in a discussion. So for school readiness, some identified gaps: affordability of early learning programs, availability of early learning programs, and awareness of existing early learning programs. So as you can see here, one of the proposed short-term investments include child scholarship slot payments, particularly focused on summer and early learning programs. In the next column, we highlighted some targeted zip codes based on some of the findings that we have found, and really also based on some of the census data that also indicates areas of poverty. And then we included some information around potential vulnerable populations that you all might want to think about and consider as you're doing this work. As it relates to estimated costs, we include, about $200 a week for a child to attend a summer learning program. And at the end here are just some outcomes that you can think about. Well, what can happen if we funded these programs in the summer? You can potentially have an increase in parent knowledge of quality school readiness services. There seems to be a lot around folks just being aware of what's available. And so that is also echoed throughout the report, just making folks aware that these services exist. We do find that in our other counties that we've done this work, awareness usually rises to the top. And it was interesting that even in conducting the focus groups during the discussions, a parent will say, well, you can get such and such service here. And another parent will say, I've been here for this many years and I've never known that. So that came up as one of the things. Another thing that you can think of another outcome, obviously increasing the number of children that could potentially access VPK programming during the school year. And here we talk a little bit about the improvement of developmental skills, school readiness skills, as well as preparing children for kindergarten. Okay. Okay, school age supports. Similarly, you'll see the identified gaps that we included in that first column. Again, affordability and access to after school and summer programming did rise to the top. So a proposed short-term outcome would include additional slots for existing summer camp programs. We understand that you might want to think about programs that are already in existence that are offering quality programs, given the short time to be able to fund these programs. And we also include some programmatic requirements that should be considered, capacity to actually handle additional slots. Is there a focus on social emotional learning? And this, again, is coming from what we saw in the data and what we heard in the focus groups, making sure that there is a health and wellness component and also helping parents to be more engaged. So allowing for some parent engagement in education. And again, you see the outcomes. On to physical health. We saw that there were some disparities in uninsured children by zip codes, identified gaps, again, affordable and accessible programs for youth fitness and activities and sports programming, oral vision health services rose to the top in terms of folks having access. We saw that parents talked about having to go far to get access to oral health and vision. So that came up as well. Potential proposed short-term investment, looking at mobile health units, both for pediatric vision and oral health. And again, benefits awareness. How can we get folks to tap into things like kid care, making them aware that programs like that exist to allow them access to healthcare. You see here, we do have, I believe you guys do have some mobile units here. So thinking about, is there a space for expansion for that as well? And again, many outcomes or benefits from doing some work in this area. Under mental health, that again rose to the top as a key concern. Affordable and accessible mental health services. I feel, as I'm reading this and I'm thinking of the other community, these are very common issues when folks are talking about access around mental health services, around physical health services. So know that these are very common. However, I think you guys have a space which you'll probably read more in the final as it relates to innovative programming that you can do that's a little maybe different than what has been done traditionally. So we do have a proposed short-term outcome. If you do decide to fund some summer programs, the possibility of including some mental health specialists to have access to children who would normally not have access to any mental health. Again, we included some estimated costs based on hiring additional mental health specialists to support summer programming. Okay. Okay, we are at youth development. Lack of engaging programs for youth. I heard that from the youth themselves, who said they just want to be able to participate in more youth programming as they get older. As you guys probably know, the programs availability lessen. So life skills curricular, targeting vulnerable populations. I'm going to throw this out there only because it resonates with me when I sat with a group of youth in one of the zip codes, and they talked about not having a safe place to just play outside. And then they shared with me just the equipment, the outdoor equipment. Now, in some other counties, they've come up with some different ways to motivate folks to think about ideas, outdoor environmental ideas, in order to, increase physical activity with youth, but to get them engaged, just to be able to play outside and socialize. And so I've seen a number of RFPs that have gone out with how can you create a space, an outdoor space for youth. So that just reminded me when that one youth said to me, go outside and look, and you can see what our outdoors look like. So family engagement education, lack of care coordination, that was another thing that was echoed in the provider focus groups. And we kind of talked about how can you think about encouraging or motivating providers to sort of work together towards a common goal. So when we had a chance to speak to the providers who were under youth development, some were learning about what others were doing for the first time. And then others were saying, oh, it'd be, I could potentially partner with this person. But there was still, I sense, sort of this competition because of lack of resources to do the work. And so, it's a tough job, but to think about how can you build a culture where folks within the county are working together towards a common goal, so that it's more of, we're all working on the same thing. Let's see how we can get there together. So that came up as well. So some of the, again, short-term investments, we're looking at summer youth enrichment programs for this higher age group. There's the prioritization in terms of zip codes and vulnerable populations are also included. We added some things to think about, including as it relates to the programmatic requirements, because we learned a lot about just social emotionally what some of the youth were experiencing. We included that as one of the things you want to think about to include for programming, including health and wellness, including healthy meals, education, physical activity, and of course, also including parent engagement. Okay, food, house, and housing stability. High poverty and ALICE rates, lack of affordable housing. This one is, again, as I mentioned, it's always a tough one to tackle, not something that a CSC, I personally believe there's nothing here that a CSC should be tackling alone anyhow. So in the report, what you will find is, how do you work with other funders? How do you strategically think about, okay, well, if you're already investing in here, maybe we can tackle this, but really taking the time for funders to come together and fund strategically so that there isn't any duplication of efforts and everyone is sort of, aiming towards the same goal. So that's in the report as well. But I think about food and housing stability, and I know many of you are probably a part or have been a part of some either coalition or some multi-sectoral collaboration. I'm sure many of you have heard about collective impact as a model for doing some of this work. We did include multi-sector collaboration to think about addressing housing stability. And again, because it's one of those things that cannot be addressed alone. I do want to add that it is an added value to have a strong facilitator. In some of the work that we have done, we have found that many times folks are coming to the table and they're interested in this work and they have a passion and they have many years of experience doing it. But when you're thinking about how do you get a group of organizations to work together to move the needle, there's another level of capacity building that needs to be provided to those folks who are facilitating. So I say that to say, we have found that in some other communities, they've had to build the capacity of the multi-sector group in order to help them to move the needle, because just coming together, as you guys know, is not going to be enough. Is that the last one? One more. Okay. I'm feeling bad because I know I might be past my time. Okay, enhanced caregivers. We know about disparities as it relates to children in the foster care system. We know about lack of services for youth transitioning out of dependency. We did include as some potential things to think about additional supports for existing parenting programs. Again, these are all in the short term. Many great ideas I think will be more appropriate for the longer term, but we were trying to think of how can we give you something to think about for each of these domains, even in the short term. Identifying and invest in appropriate databases as it relates to available services. I do know you guys have 211. They were a great partner as well. You can think about, how can we think about just making sure parents get to those resources to be able to navigate the system. We included investing in potential parenting programs, looking at resources that parents can have access to, and also thinking about mental health services. And you'll see in that last column some potential short-term benefits.
Okay. Sussman, can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Just a very short question. The recommendation, and I've gone over your recommendations. This is a result of the survey and a result of your involvement with service providers in these areas that are already providing services, but your analysis find that there is a lack of some of these services for the children and families in these particular areas. Am I correct?
Yes, particularly as two things are happening. One is being aware that the services exist. When I think offhand, the one place I can tell you that there appeared to be a lack of services is for youth programming for the older youth, 14 to 16 years old. And so I want to reiterate, it's a result of talking to the providers, as you just mentioned, as well as speaking to parents and youth. And then we had the comprehensive program inventory that allows you to see by domain how many providers you have that focus on a particular domain. So you do have that at your availability as well. Did that? I want to make sure I answered it correctly.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so this last table really are just more general investment areas that we found there to be a need for. And the first is thinking about how to help families in the community be more aware of the resources that are available. So we did have here a potential or something you might want to consider is investing in some marketing to get the word out about CSC. As I stated, one of the things we did was even in the provider survey, we made phone calls. We called folks who were not responding. Like we really tried to reach folks to get their input, particularly for the provider survey. Know that it can still remain open. You can still continue to collect data on that. But we found that the parents that were completing the survey, as well as some providers just didn't know who CSC was. So that's one thing you might want to think about, which is also very common as you think about a new organization that's now starting operation. Capacity building for providers. As I stated earlier, we conducted a number of focus groups with providers. And in addition to that, as I'm stating here, some requirements that you might want to think about including. We understand that that's related to capacity, right? We're asking them, well, we want you to collect outcome data. We want you to collect data that tells us, one, did you do what you said you were going to do, which is what we refer to as outputs. And then we're saying it's important to let us know, did it make a difference? So you could be providing a lot of services and then no one's getting any better. And in order to collect that data, they really need to have the capacity to collect outcome data. We find that that's not always the case. So you might want to think about what capacity building providers may need as you're thinking about some requirements to tell whether or not they're making a difference. We recommended emergency funds for any emergency or that may arise, natural disaster. We're coming up with hurricane season soon, or yeah, I think it's about June. And then some reserves for Q1 allocation for the fall grant cycle. And I think that was the last slide. Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. Some things just to note, I think Dr. Glenn mentioned it earlier, the final gap analysis report, which will include some recommendations. The KOM, I know you guys now have your new acronyms, right? That's Key Outcomes and Measures tool. From that, there'll be a sort of like a benchmark with where Leon County is as it relates to, if you guys remember, a couple of months ago, we shared the theory of change and we had some outcomes there. So that benchmark will include where you guys stand as it relates to that. And then June 3rd will be the funding options B, which is more long-term. Right now, we talked about short-term, that's going to be happening very soon. And then you'll also get a final comprehensive programs inventory and an informative programs inventory. And that is the last slide.
Sure, Mr. Watts, of course.
Well, first, thank you for your presentation. Listening to this, it just made me nervous. Made me nervous just about the task of trying to come up with something to get out so fast. And it was almost kind of disappointing, again, just to realize that there's so many programs already here in Leon County, and these are the possible findings and recommendations that we have. Now we have to try to come up with how to make us look successful as a council of where we put some funding. And I feel like there's a lot of pressure. I feel like this, whatever we decide on right now, is so important. And I hate to use the word, it can't fail, but I feel like it is so important, the direction that happens right now for this summer funding. And it kind of sets the trajectory of possibly how people view this council moving forward. And I wondered if any of these recommendations actually, when you talk about all these different programs and are they, okay, they have these services, are they being successful? Have you found any information that supports that funding actually goes more towards how do you integrate these other folks, these other groups to possibly be more effective in these services? I don't know if that came up in your research or if you have experience with other councils where, hey, this is, you don't necessarily just need to start throwing things out to a summer camp. You might need to start from a bigger umbrella to be more impactful. I don't know.
Well, I do want to comment. I too was nervous about the task that you all have before you. I know that there is a lot of funding that is coming down the pipeline for Leon County. Just from our discussion as a team, we were sort of thinking about how can you, is there a way to, I want to say it, but then I don't want to say it. Is there an opportunity to just wait? Speak to the other funding streams that are coming out and think about, okay, we know funding it's coming in these areas. They're not here yet, but we know they're coming. They're in these areas. Would that help you to make a more strategic decision as to what funding you're going to put out now for this summer? I'm just throwing it out there for discussion.
So Sandra, I'm going to interrupt you on purpose because for full disclosure, we had this conversation with QQ and what Dr. Williams said was, I have to tell you that with all of the funding that is coming down, we almost want to recommend that you all put a pause in place until you know what those plans are and how that money is going to be used. And my response to her was, I believe that the council has to have all the information in order to make the decision. So that is why she was saying, I was almost hesitant to say it, but I felt like, let's say it, and then you all can think about that as you look at these recommendations and make some sort of decision. But we are in communication with the various entities that will be getting the ARPA funding, so that as soon as they have those plans in place, I know the ELC is working furiously trying to figure out how they're going to expend all their money. The money's coming down to the LEAs, the local educational areas. And so we are in communication with them, but right now we don't know what their plans are.
So maybe the sensible thing is to go to the committee recommendations and we can have the debate about what the committee's, the discussion, not a debate, what am I talking about? The discussion, collegial. We'll have a discussion about the committee's recommendations. Mr. Mitchell, your thoughts?
Well, actually, Mr. Jones, go ahead. Yeah.
Mr. Jones, your thoughts?
Well, I go back to what we said at the last meeting from our director, when I continue to talk about innovation and ingenuity. You rightly said that there's no great expectation of ingenuity and innovation, but we do realize that there's great unmet need, and that and the allegory that you used was, it's not intended that we're going to fund a book bag drive, but those already existing partners, stakeholders in our community who are already providing children's services. You instructed us that it would be best in our best interest to supplement already existing activity to make certain that if there was a gap between the target populations being served, if they needed 5,000, only had funding to do 3,500, that we would make up the difference. And so with that sensible set of instructions, I was under the impression is that was the way we would continue to move forward with that same, and I love to use, Mrs. Green and I were English majors together at A&M. So I love to use the word allegory because that was one of the words we learned in college. But I like that allegory because it is an accurate representation of how I think we should best proceed forward.
Mr. Mitchell, I just want the record to reflect Mr. Mitchell quoted Robert Foster. I did not miss it. Go ahead.
No, Councilmember Jones is correct. Again, I just want to make sure you all have all the information. But he is absolutely correct. And I think when we move to the recommendations, you will see an effectuation of that exact sentiment.
Mr. Mitchell, you recognized, if you would like.
I would like. I'm just trying to think of the order in which I want to go. I'm going to start at sort of the base, and it's something that Ms. McFadden has, from really the first meeting, talked about, and that is we as a county, we as a state, we as a nation are flooded with cash right now. We don't really know. It's not all in our pocketbooks yet, but it's coming, and we know this. It's not going to be coming year after year after year after year. So I see this money in a similar way, and that is, yes, hopefully this will continue year after year, but it's still a small pot of money. So I start there. The second thing I thought of was to Mr. Watts's point, and that is whatever we do, your point that nobody really knows who the Children's Services Council is. You know what? There's two ways that they can know about us. One is we can screw up and they'll know all about us. I mean, it's just human nature. That will make the news, that your neighbors will know we're really bad, okay? The flip side is if we do a really good job, people will know about us because they will be the direct beneficiary of what we've done. So gray doesn't work here. If we're looking for people to learn who we are, there's two ways of doing it, and it's the two extremes. The gray in between is not. I'd prefer that we not get known for a bad job. And then I struggle, and I've Commissioner Cummings, I mention you on a regular basis because you changed my mind and you changed my heart in one of the meetings where you said, I want it this summer. And I thought, God, this is, I mean, you know, God bless you. That's great, but that seems ambitious. And then I thought, good for her. That's what this is supposed to be about. We are supposed to be an ambitious body, not wasteful, but ambitious. And so citing, you know, 3 of the 10 of us as the kind of the foundation of the comment I want to make regarding all of these recommendations.
Options,
all of these options. There's one thing that's kind of missing, and that is I need something to lay them on top of. I know that there are gaps. By the way, we're not allowed to fund things that are currently being funded or that there is funding for.
Correct.
So we got to be real careful just because there is a perceived gap or there is a gap because nobody knows about the service that's being provided. If it's being provided, if money is there, we can't. So I don't, that's the only thing that's been missing on all of these options is like, they're all good options. I mean, they're all, you did your work. At the very beginning, you talked about, you guys are almost finished with what I see as this board that has all of the programs that are currently being offered for children and families in this county. And I do feel like we would be a little premature trying to get too creative about what we fund. But I go back to Commissioner Cummings, and I'm thinking to myself, it's 10 people. Surely we can boil down all of these recommendations, all of these options to come up with 1, 2, or 3 things that we want to focus on. And so I don't know if this is the way of kicking it off, but there were things that were said at Childs High School the other night that, as small of a crowd as we had, were really incredible. And that was mental health, oral health. Those 2 issues I hope we tackle, and I think we can tackle them during the summer with immediate funding. And by the way, even though it's not a Mother Nature made emergency, I think it is an emergency. So that's.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mitchell. Dr. Glenn, bring us home.
I'm going to bring us home. Thank you so very much, Dr. Williams, for sharing this information with regards to the expedited funding. One thing that I do want to say almost before she sits down is that, I mean, you don't have to, you can sit down. It's absolutely fine. But I do think it's important that we realize that the options that are being provided here are the options for the summer. And we have made a decision that we are going to have some funding opportunities for some immediate things. And I agree that there are some additional dollars that are coming. And I do think we need to look long and hard at that. And we need to be vigilant. But I think that we've already made a decision that we are going to address the needs of children in our community this summer. And I would like to see us move forward with doing that. And I'm not saying to take our eye off of the ball with the additional funding that's coming down the line, because I do agree that we need to leverage that. But while we're looking at that, there are kids that will fall through gaps this summer. And I do think we're in this space and we have the capability to address that. So I would love to see us move forward, even though It's going to cause for some sleepless nights over the next couple of weeks, but I do think it will meet the needs of the children that we are here to serve. So I do want to say that. With that, what I would like to do is the committee had the program services committee has had an opportunity to hear this report before. So we've heard this. And based on what we heard, we came up with some recommendations for how we would like to move forward to get the money on the streets for the summer. Which means we're going to have to work very, very fast, and we put together some recommendations. So I'm going to read through the recommendations. I've already heard, some different approaches to how we can do it, and that will be completely up for discussion as I kind of review what these recommendations are. They are in your packet, and if you all turn to page 13, which are right after the set of slides with the recommendations, like after the big pictures or the big tables that we have, you'll see the recommendations on page 13 and 14. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. So after hearing the gap analysis and after hearing the options that were brought forward to us, we thought that the best and easiest way to get the money on the street for children for the summer is to publish a simplified procurement process. So we don't want anything nearly as lengthy as we did with the ITN. We're going to do something very short, very sweet. And what we are going to be asking is for an expansion to for short-term capacity of existing programs. So we're not asking for them to come up with anything new or creative right now. We want programs that are already in place, that are existing, that will meet the needs of children where there are a gap in services. So if we know, just like the example that Mr. Jones brought forward, if we only have services for X number of children, we want something that's going to expand those services. So because we need to turn this around quickly, we're focusing on existing programs, and we're asking for these services to be in the specific zip codes that were prioritized in the report. So when we had the draft report, we didn't have the specific zip codes in there. We asked QQ to go back and put this, where do we see the specific needs for these services in these areas? And they did go back and do that. So we will publish, those zip codes and say, we need these services in this zip code. Now, here's what we're recommending. We're going to allow entities to propose expansion of services in any of the priority areas. And I know that, Mr. Mitchell, you've already suggested maybe a modification for that, but we thought that there is definitely a need and a gap in all of these areas from what we saw. So we wanted for people to come to the table and say, we could expand services around school readiness, school age support, physical health, mental health, youth development, food stability for families, housing, and then also support for caregivers. So wherever there are services and they have the option to expand that in any of the priority areas, we want to hear what they want to bring to the table. So that's our recommendation. We will allow extra points for entities that serve as intermediaries because we're really trying to encourage community collaborations. We want them to partner with each other. So if an entity will serve as an intermediary and they are applying on behalf of multiple partners that already exist in the community, we will allow extra points for that because we're encouraging collaboration. We are encouraging or will offer extra points for applications that propose the expansion of services to target inequities by the use of home-based programs or mobile services. One of the major things that I heard loud and clear in the community forums that we had is people need the services at their front door. They need it in their community. They can't go cross town to get it. So we need to have opportunities for people to have home-based programs or mobile programs, just any type of, that's where I'm looking for the innovation. How are you going to bring the service to the individual in their home? So we want to provide extra points for that. We're also going to provide extra points that expand the capacity of programs in order to connect families to mental health, specifically to mental health services, youth force development, or also legal services. So those are the things that we're really looking for to be amplified. So if they're able to bring mental health to an existing program, you get extra points for that. If you're able to bring workforce development services to an existing program or legal services to an existing program, extra points for that. Then another recommendation is to provide examples in the procurement. So we want to give them examples. I know I'm the kind of person that reads things like, what do they mean? Like, I'm not sure what they mean by that. We want to give them very specific examples. So some of the examples we came up with, providing scholarships, child care scholarships for expanded programs in early learning, child care scholarships for participation in summer camp programs, adding a mental health specialist or even a paid intern in that particular area in an existing program. So we'll provide examples so they have an understanding of what we're looking for and what we need. We want to include that as a part of the procurement process. So those are the recommendations that we have for getting the procurement out on the street immediately. Now, we did come up with 2 additional recommendations. I'm going to go through all of them and then we'll stop and have a conversation.
First public comment.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. It's keeping me in order. Okay, so the second major thing that we discussed at our meeting is we heard loud and clear that people still don't know who CSC is. As much as this is a part of who we are, there are a lot of people in the community that are clueless as to, my husband still asks me, so what do y'all do again? You know, I mean, so, you know, we have to be able to get the information out. So what we would like to do is to put out an ITN for a public relations firm that's going to help the community understand what CSC is and what we do and why we're doing what it is that we're doing. We want to brand our work. We want them to be able to bring forward awareness, help cultivate a street team, a street outreach team. I think Mr. Levine talked at one of our meetings about, what was the term that I can't remember. We call it the boot camp, the street. I can't remember. There's a unique terminology we used. Right, boots on the ground, just people out in the community and going through the streets and making sure that the neighborhoods were aware of the work that we were doing. And then providing a community-wide media campaign for children's services and helping them navigate a lot of the different types of programs and services. So, you know, people in the community that are really navigating and helping them with that. So we're hoping that we can get a PR firm to be able to provide those services for us. We are hoping that we can grant authority to the staff to determine the needs, investment, and then to set a minimum threshold of at least $50,000 to be able to get the PR firm in place to provide that service. I think one of the recommendations we saw earlier was $15,000, and we were like, there is no way we were going to be able to get that done. And then another part to that recommendation is to require respondents to match their proposal with in-kind contributions. So, you know, if you want to come to the table to provide PR services for the Children's Services Council, we would expect that they would offer in-kind contribution of additional services. So that's to leverage what we can get out of them. You know, we're going to give you something and we expect some in-kind services from your organization also. So that's what we have put together with regards to the public relations. We are also, and I'm just going through these, direct staff to identify and appoint volunteers. So we need to have some group of individuals that's going to read through the procurements that are going to come through, or the RFPs that are going to come through for the expedited funding. We want volunteers to be able to go through that so that we are not the ones that are sitting down reviewing this, and so that there won't be any bias, you know, based on where we are. So we're looking for some volunteers. We want to identify them and we want to appoint them, especially for the summer, because we've got to get these people on the street immediately, looking at those proposals that come in. And we will make sure that those volunteers fully understand that we are on a crunch, expedited timeline. They understand that, and that we provide training to them so they understand what it is that we're looking for. So we want to be able to get that available, and we want to give the staff the authority to get those individuals, get those volunteers in place, because these are supposed to hit the street on Friday. Is it Friday? Oh my gosh, it's tomorrow. Wow, I'm still thinking we have a couple of days.
Which is
Friday.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So
Both answers are correct.
yeah, so we have to get those volunteers immediately. We also want to get some, allow the staff to identify volunteers for the long-term programs. So not just for the expedited funding, but we want to also include community partners, national firms to serve on the public relations evaluations team. So we need to be able to get those individuals ready and prepared to evaluate the PR opportunities. We also want to direct the staff to develop an online application. So, we are going to we're going to appoint staff for the expedited funding, but we want the people that want to actually evaluate our long-term funding to go through an application process. And so we want to allow the staff to be able to create that online process so that we can find those volunteers, ensure that they're trained and ready so that when we start funding the option B for the fall, we have a pool of individuals that are ready to evaluate those. And then the last recommendation that we came up with was at a minimum to reserve $1.45 million of our current program services budget for Q1 funding for the next fiscal year. So I know that was a lot, but we went through those recommendations. Yes, sir.
No, when you get to the end.
Yes.
I want to make sure that you get to the end of your presentation, then we'll take public comment. Then we'll have a motion so that our debate is informed by public comment before the council members.
Okay, then I'm at the end because I know our time is short. I'm at the end, but I wanted to make sure you all had an opportunity. I hope you all were able to follow as I went through those, but these were the recommendations from the Program Services Committee.
So the bottom line is the recommendations been summarized by Dr. Glenn. The recommendation itself is to vote on the draft procurement document that's included in the packet. Your recommendation is summarize that.
I want us to vote on accepting the recommendations from the the Program Services Committee, which are the 6 recommendations that I just read out to everybody.
Excellent. Do we have any public comment?
We have one public comment.
Mr. Lockenbach. Oh, I'm sorry. I stepped on you. I apologize for that.
We have Rick Lockenbach.
Mr. Lockenbach, you're recognized.
Hi, Rick Lockenbach, 1012 City Road, Tallahassee, FLA. A lot of good work has gone into the needs assessment that's being done. I think Carolyn Cummings is correct. You should try to get money out this summer, but you also need to be realistic. Also think what Mr. Watts had to say is an important thing to consider. And as Mr. Mitchell has said, you need to come up with something that's realistic and is going to give you the kind of returns that you need to be getting in with your summer initiative. I really wonder how many of these are realistic given the kind of timeline that you've set for yourselves. And I want to make sure everybody is aware of it, of what I read, which is that essentially the money's going to go out in a month, including signing contracts, which is hugely ambitious. And then all the work is to be done by the end of August, which means 3 months. You might consider making the last date for activity to be beyond the end of August. If you're doing something like a summer camp, that doesn't make sense. But for some of the other activities, you might consider that. Yeah, I've been involved with education, social services for 40 years or thereabouts, and I've seen too many programs that have withered on the vine. I've seen things that were innovative and that had a lot of potential, and they were funded, but then the money goes away, and then oh well. I'm cautioning you against being in that boat. I also wonder about on the realistic front. I think it's good and noble to be doing summer scholarships as has been proposed, but is it realistic to be able to do that this summer with a contract that you're going to be signing at the beginning of June? And I think that's questionable. So I would encourage you to take a close look at those activities have been proposed and in the interest of doing, getting off on the right foot as Mr. Mitchell has suggested, take a close look at that and you may not be able to resolve that today. You might need to have another meeting to discuss that rather than forcing yourselves to come up with something today because you want to have a good start. And so I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lockenbach, as always, for your thoughtful comments. Any other public comment card?
Yes, Mr. Jack Levine.
Mr. Levine, you're recognized. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, wow, first of all, I recommend that any programs you consider investing in for the summer months don't turn into a disappointment in the fall. In other words, as we expand access, I worry about retracting that access come fall. So I think we have to be very, very smart about making these what I'll call supplemental. And one way of determining that is you might want to have a volunteer plan prescribed that matches the money so that community organizations that can attract volunteerism for things like summer reading, for things like safety programs, et cetera, we are maximizing the dollars with the time, and that'll be more long lasting. Let me move to the public relations. Be careful. Public awareness does not necessarily translate into public action. We have been meeting now for about 7 months on a vision that we're now calling Hours for Leon. And that is a combination of both surveying where we are now on the volunteer accounting, as well as how to use resources like the Jim Moran Institute, Entrepreneurial Institute, and individuals who are very, very smart at getting folks not only informed, but inspired to create a Leon County that is truly a county that volunteers. So I would like you to consider inviting us maybe back for a workshop. We probably would be ready for that in a couple of weeks. I'm speaking for some others when I say that, and then really launch this idea that time and money are both resources that we could gather towards quality programs that can be measured, and more people would be involved across the generations. Very finally, I love the idea of having people interviewed and capturing those interviews into some kind of a package that brings the heart and the head together to convince people that investing in children is investing in our future. And that could be the voices of grandparents, the voices of neighbors, the voices of the clergy, the voices of people who are truly committed. And let's collect these into a kind of a summer family album that I think can be done both efficiently and effectively. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Levine, for your always thoughtful comments. All right, so we've had public comments. So remember now, I'm going to ask for a motion, and the purpose of the motion is really so that the parliamentarian says we're doing things the right way, and then we'll have the discussion. The motion can be made by somebody who thinks we shouldn't do anything right now, just so that we can have an.
I will second it.
Moved and second, moved by Ms. McFadden, seconded by Mr. Mitchell. Discussion. Mr. O'Brien, your thoughts.
As we evaluate and go through the abbreviated ITN or review process for summer programs, do we have an amount that we think we should put on the street? There is an estimated cost on the public relations campaign and the other pieces, but that's the one that I'm not quite clear how much we hope to make available for these programs.
I'm not either.
Which sort of brings me to another question that I had, Dr. Glenn, a related question. This is the RFP, the program proposal application overview. basically says, here's our areas of need, tell us how you can fix it. Is the concept that then we come back and figure out what money we want to spend, and maybe we want to spend none? In other words, we wait really to answer that question until we see what the proposals are.
Well, I would suggest that we have a not to exceed amount. It may be that it's none after we evaluate. At the same time, I think that we need to identify that there are dollars coming in. I don't know if we want to pour all of our dollars out at one time when we recognize that there are huge dollars out there. We want to get something out there, but the question is, I'm not sure.
Do we back into the number by the 1.45 reserve? Is that kind of the idea?
Well,
I'd be
Yeah,
interested
that
in
would
what
be,
you say.
if we backed in it that way, if you just gonna throw, round numbers out, we currently have $6 million. You back out 1.45, we're down to $4.5 million. If
That's a lot of money to throw out in the summer.
holy mackerel, yeah, it is.
That's a lot to throw out for summer.
Yeah, so I wouldn't back into it that way. I would sort of say, what seems like a good number, and know that don't go over 4.45 million, because that's all you got.
We didn't talk about a number.
Mr. Hannah, your thoughts?
So I'm starting to feel like Mr. Watts right now. My stomach is getting a little tight and getting sweaty. When I was young, if I swept out the garage and did my chores, I had allowance. And by the time I had that allowance in my pocket, I was on my bike to the Sing store and spent every penny. That's when I was young. I'm not young anymore. And these decisions are vitally important. I feel comfortable where it says at a minimum that money will be left. But again, just because we have money doesn't mean we have to spend the money. We want to ensure that we're spending, if we're investing resources, that we're doing it in a very thoughtful manner. We're not rushed. We're not pressured. I am somewhat concerned. I guess I missed the article that said that these programs have to end in August. I don't know that if we had that discussion and I just missed it.
So if Chair, if you'll allow me to jump in.
Executive Director Green, you're recognized.
Thank you. So there are a couple of things. We do already have a draft of what the RFA would look like. It is in your packet, and that's the second part of all of this. So that's number one. Number two, this money would fill gaps for the summer only. The most innovative part of this would be looking at how you couple services together, provide them at a camp of some type, maybe do mobile, maybe go to the house, but this is not an RFA that is looking for innovation. So that's the next thing. The third thing I will say is that in the RFP overview, we say that there is no guarantee that we are funding everything for which you ask, because we anticipate there will be applications and we will look at those, the evaluators will look at those, but we are not guaranteeing that if you tell us it's $100,000 to expand, that we are going to fund your whole $100,000. So I did want to put that out there and again, just emphasize that this would be for summer only, not for expanded programs into the fall.
And remember too, the needs assessment is not complete. What we are doing today is analyzing the work product that QQ gave us in response to the committee's consensus of recognizing that there was no way to get the needs assessment done by now. So this is the interim recommendation on the gap analysis, right? The needs assessment isn't supposed to be done until May.
Right. Completed.
Yeah.
Till June, actually, right.
I'm sorry.
No, you're.
I apologize. The way I was thinking about this was that I do want to put these out and see what we get. Because I don't think we're gonna, I don't know, I might be dead wrong. I don't think we're gonna get $4 million worth of proposals that are gonna come in to us, but I do want to see what's there. And I think we have the opportunity, once we review those, to make a determination we can fund up to this amount based on what we think the needs are. We know what our cap is internally, and we have the right to cut it off at any point in time. I do think that if we put a dollar amount out there and say, we will fund up to $4 million, then we're going to get proposals that, for up to $4 million. I would like to see what come in. We make the decision and we determine where the cutoff line is. So that was my thought.
Excellent. Commissioner Cummings, you're recognized.
Thank you, Judge Surstrom. I want to first of all thank Dr. Williams for her presentation, the work that they've done over the months, and thank Dr. Glenn and her committee for the recommendation and the summary and the report that we have gotten today. Quite frankly, I'm very encouraged about the report. I'm always cognizant that the statute provides that we cannot supplant services that are already being provided. The recommendation, I believe, excuse me, I'm sorry. The recommendations, I believe, pass muster as far as not being supplantation, because they are asking primarily for service providers already in those particular areas to supplement what they're doing and look at some of these specific areas that have already been determined to be deficient. In the gap, I guess we can call it the precursor to the actual gap analysis. We know that there are needs in the community. We know for whatever reason, the mental health of our children is declining. We know that the suicide rate is increasing. So, I mean, we know that just from general knowledge and just from reading statistics. We know that there's food instability in the community, especially during the summertime. We see the PB&J, what is it? WCTV and Second Harvest. We see that going on right now to make sure our children during the summer have food. Many of them count on school, breakfast and what they have, lunch at school, and sometimes they have afternoon snacks. But during the summertime, many of our children are not getting nourishing meals. So I like the categories that the program committee has indicated here, and I too am anxious to see what responses we get. I would not want to be so cautious as to say, let's not put this out, let's wait. I believe there are needs right now, and I believe we can scrutinize any proposals that come in. We can analyze them. We can negotiate with the service providers. It's staff, can do that. And if we see innovative programs that provide services to our children that was envisioned when the Children's Services Council was created, I believe we as a council have a responsibility to do that. I believe we need to put money on the streets this summer, but we just have to be careful to make sure it's addressing needs of our children and not just adding to what's already being provided, Your Honor.
So much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cummings. Mr. Jones, you recognize.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. I too agree with the motion put forward and the recommendations brought by staff. I think that, and I'm not, and I know I've somewhere in our documents, not sure how we're doing the scoring of it entirely, but what I'm hoping is that the procurement instrument that we could possibly consider would be an ITN, which would give us the flexibility to, one, based upon the responses that we get, and then based upon the limited dollars we have, armed with what we know are our priorities, then we can make those determinations about where we're able to respond in such a way that we're able to provide the types of support for activity to do much like what I described when we first started this conversation. And I know we got a lot of proposals, a lot of procurement tools that we can use, but the ITN, I think, provides us with the greatest flexibility in terms of identifying price compared to usually what are hard, fast numbers that are expressed in our RFP. So I don't know if that's our plan moving forward. And then I want us, and when we talk about the public relations piece, I want us to be very clear about the intended audiences that we're talking to. They are we, I mean, because as we're talking about defining, you have a question to me, or you,
I was just trying to get the judge's attention.
that you'll go there? Okay, I'm
So I
sorry.
got Mitchell next and then McFadden.
Okay. That the RF, but however we do the public relations piece, I want us to be clear about who we're talking to. Are we talking to the families that will be ultimately served to get greater recognition? We're talking about talking with folks within the human services and children's services community. We're talking about a community-wide campaign, because all of those nuances, all those different target audiences are communicated with differently. I am always concerned about how we communicate with the target audiences of whether it be the school district or human services, because they don't necessarily are communicated with in what we see as the most convenient means, right? Peach jar doesn't work for all the families that we serve, because a great number of them, if they're using their cell phones, and the cell phones may not be compatible for those types of discussions, right? Television matters. And then, so I just want to make certain that as we are define our target audiences, I think it needs to be clear in the RFP, the ITN for public relations, so that those who are evaluating it will be able to see who their intended subcontracting vendors are, to make certain that all of the populations that we identify in the ITN are going to be well served.
Yeah, and so if I may, Chair, this is where my communications and PR background comes in. So I so appreciate that, and that is so true. And I think that using the information that we've received thus far from QQ, when we look at the disparity, those areas that were starred, which actually meant that you're seeing a difference in certain zip codes and certain races and demographics versus others, will help to inform, to ensure that we've got the appropriate messaging to the appropriate audiences.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. McFadden, you're recognized.
Thought Mr. Mitchell was.
Mr. Mitchell said he deferred to Ms. McFadden.
Oh, okay. All right, I had a couple comments. First off, I wonder if, from a financial perspective, if we do want to pick an amount, and I would throw out 2.5 million for consideration in the summer, so we have enough for the fall. And I would not want to limit the public relations to 50,000, if that's what I heard. I thought we were gonna just let that go out there, because putting street teams on the ground and everything, that's just not a realistic number. So I'd rather just have that be undefined. I totally agree with an ITN proposal. I noticed in the RFA that's there that it says you must be a nonprofit. I would prefer the eligibility be looked at much more like they do with government grants. And we allow for-profits, public housing authorities, small businesses, and public universities of higher learning to also be in that mix.
So if I may, Councilmember McFadden, we do have, it's not limited to nonprofits. We did put a clause in there that if it was not a nonprofit, that they would need to pair up
And
with
I
one.
disagree with that.
Okay.
I know it's the next session. I just
Okay.
want to bring it forward because I am a very strong proponent that great ideas come from everywhere and that nonprofits just don't own them all. So I just kind of want to put that out there.
Okay.
I really like
Ms.
this.
McFadden, I just want to comment. So we said a minimum of $50,000 for the PR campaign, not a maximum of 50.
I just don't think we should put an amount in there. I think you're going to get more better ideas. If people think you're looking at 50,000 as a floor, that's very unattractive. I used to run a PR firm. I wouldn't apply. Whereas if there's either make the floor higher or just don't put the number out there and look and see what the innovation is that comes at you. That would be my recommendation.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Ms. McFadden. Was that,
Now I can't read my writing for the last comment. Sad to admit. Oh, I have it. I have talked to a number of groups that are going to apply as intermediaries. So there's a lot of excitement about that concept of intermediaries being out there, and they're reaching out to their varied partners already. So I think we're going to get some really great responses. And I just wanted to share that. I spoke at National Fundraisers group here in town a couple days ago, and just a lot of people with excitement about the opportunity.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Kind of couple thoughts. One, I am a big believer in public relation firms. I think they're very effective. I think this is cart way before the horse at this point. I don't support hiring a PR firm now. I do support hiring a PR firm after this summer, after we've got money out on the street, after we've seen the results of our effort, and then that PR firm taking all of the work that we've done up to this point for the first year, seeing the funding out on the street, we sort of have something like, now go tell people what we are. Again, I don't confuse it with, I don't want a PR firm. I think it would be fantastic. I happen to agree with Ms. McFadden that telling people, sort of telegraphing a dollar amount, and I get your point. It says minimum, but you're kind of telegraphing, we're looking for 50 grand. Isn't the way to go. So I would be not supportive of using any of this money for a PR firm. I am watching, and everything we've spent, you all, and this will come up in my report, every penny we have spent, you can feel proud about. When you pull into your driveway and your neighbor looks and says, how are you spending my money? You can feel very proud that we have not wasted any money. And I say that with great comfort. This is money that needs to be, whatever money we spend needs to be about helping children and families. And I don't think that hiring a PR firm, even if we had already hired them, they could do anything that would raise awareness for this summer money. And I think
That's not the intent. I thought that was the intent.
I was waiting for the finish.
yeah. So again, it's part of a package that is the immediate funding. And I'm one vote. With all due respect, I just think it's not good use of money. The other thing I would say is, as it relates to the recommendation on taking in all of looking at all the proposals, so proposals come in, and I think Ms. McFadden's right that there is interest out there. It's real interest, and I think that the proposals we get are going to be good proposals. I don't think there's going to be any fly-by-night organizations. I don't think there's going to be so many that well, I'll jump to the end. I don't feel comfortable if I don't know why we wouldn't take a look at them. If I don't think there's going to be 50 proposals, why wouldn't we as council members look at them, score them the same way that we did the QQ proposals, the executive director search? Because then when it comes to a vote, I'll know what I'm voting on. 5 people, all wonderful volunteers, all good people, are going to look at proposals, and they are going to assume that they know what we want. And maybe I'm just volunteering for the committee, and that's fine. But I will feel much more comfortable because I want to read what the proposals are. And as long as I'm going to read them, I might as well score them.
Sure. Can I?
You're probably going to say it, Dr. Glenn.
No, it's okay.
Committee chair.
Well, yeah, thank you. So, thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. We did hear from multiple people at what, I think it was at a committee meeting. I can't, the meetings are all running together. But we did have representatives from multiple agencies. I know, was it United Way? The lady that was there from the United Way?
Yes.
Who talked about the value of having volunteer, because I was like you, I was on the same page with you. Like, if we're gonna fund this, I want to be able to read this. But there are biases that we will have based on our connections within the community, what we see. And by having those volunteers do that work for us, she said that, you know, because she changed my mind. She said, it really takes you out of it and really provides merit to the individual, the content that they have provided in the proposals. So that was a recommendation that she gave, and that I think there was another organization also, if I remember correctly. So,
Wouldn't it,
Well-
I mean, wouldn't they have bias?
Well, I need to give a point of,
go ahead.
I don't know if I can do a point of order, Madam Parliamentarian, but in our previous meeting in February, the Program Services Committee came back, and in their recommendations, that was a recommendation that was approved by the council to have external evaluators. That being said, it does not preclude any of the council members reading those applications and providing comments if you would like to, but the council did approve to use external
Mr.
evaluators.
O'Brien, you're recognized.
I think it's a good idea to get external input, but at the end of the day, we're the ones voting on it and going to be held accountable to it. So if we do it for the purpose of getting a perspective from the community as to what they see, and again, we have to be clear on who's going to be those committee members, because you talk about bias. The bias isn't just individually people around this, in this circle, but it'll be people in the community. So again, I would do it for the purpose of getting perspective from the community, but not as a final vote. I think at the end of the day, it's this group that has to make the final vote and be held accountable to how those dollars are spent.
I just want to clarify, Councilmember O'Brien, if I may, they will score them and we will bring you the scores. Then you all make the final determination
Then
on
we
what
can-
moves
then we can-
forward.
Then we can score after that. Onto the PR firm, I strongly agree with Mr. Mitchell. And it goes back to Mr. Watts's comments. We're very early in this process. We don't have all the information. There's going to be a lot of questions about how the dollars are spent, especially when we have limited dollars out there. And to some degree, we're going to have to define, not defend, but define why we're spending the dollars, how we're spending them. Right now, we don't have all the information in. I trust that we'll get really good information. I trust that when we make the final decisions on how those dollars are going to go out, that's when we need to have a public relations campaign. I don't think we need to spend the dollars once and spend them a second time because they are limited dollars. I mean, we should look at this as our personal dollars. How would we spend them? I think the PR firm, and I agree that there is a value in that. We need to engage them to help us tell out our story about the process through which we went, the information that we got, and how we came up with the conclusions on how we're directing those dollars. I think that's the story we need to tell. I think if we tell it now, it's an incomplete story, and quite frankly, I'm not sure what we tell them anyway. And then the last thing I want to say is that as we look at putting dollars out there this summer, I think we need to be very, very, very clear that whatever we put out there through this process, and I don't know if it's going to be $2.5 million, $1 million, $250. It'll be something, I'm sure. We need to be smart about how we do that, but we need to be also very clear that we don't have all the information that we need to make full and complete decisions. So what monies we're putting out there are really just to put money out there where we can identify immediate needs, but this is more short-term and not the long-term. So as we put dollars out there, we need to make sure people understand this is not the final direction, or this is not an indicator where we're going long-term. This is just basically putting support out there as we see it now. But the long-term direction we take will be defined by the full community assessment that we receive. Now, it's a lot to say all at once, and I'm done.
Well done. Well done as always. Mr. Jones, you're recognized.
I apologize. I was under the impression that the public relations piece was associated with the summer activity. So I thought that they were going to be, that's why I talked about the audiences, the different audiences, stakeholder groups, because I thought they were going to be communicating where our monies were going to those, whatever agencies were going to be receiving our money. They would know to go to Second Harvest because Children's Services Council was, so that's why I thought, so I guess because it's all together, I thought that's why that was a part of that. So I understand your point, both of your points of view in that regard. One of the things, reason I talked about the ITN, one of the things that you said at the very beginning is we talked about ARPA funding going to a variety of stakeholders. We said that there would be this type of coordinated conversation with already existing agencies, armed with what we know the school district will get and what United Way may receive and other stakeholders, Second Harvest and others may receive, armed with that information as a part of our process with an ITN, those already existing organizations, it was my intent that once we're informed of those information, if any one of those were to be a part of our applicant pool, we would know it all, we would be able to maximize on what were already sources that had already been distributed in our community from the feds and being able to disseminate it across our community.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, a lot of that information is not going, a lot of that funding is not going to effectuate this summer. Most of that will probably start moving into the fall because, for example, the ELC is still trying to get a plan together on how they're going to use all of that funding.
But I thought I heard that said here just today.
I don't think I said that. So we have been in contact with the ELC, the school district, Dr. Gale and such, to see if there has been any planning or what the thought is on how that money is going to be used. They do not have that yet. And we don't expect that there will be a plan in place for this summer.
Not for summer, but for the fall.
But for the fall, absolutely.
I got you.
And Councilmember McFadden absolutely brought that up in advance of and during the Program Services Committee, and QQ will be looking at that as you get to the final report that will be due in June. So if we have that information, it will be in that final report to help make decisions and recommendations on funding option B.
I'm with you now. Thank you so much for clarifying for me.
Mr. Mitchell.
So, kind of going back to the funding issue, I still, despite what someone at the United Way says, still believe that human beings have bias, no matter what. And the reason that this council was selected the way in which it was to try to, in fact, the statute says that it's the requirement that when the governor makes decisions, that he is making it based on the demographics of the county. So if you look at the 10 of us, we sort of do make up the demographics and we bring those demographic biases to the table. Totally okay with a volunteer organization or volunteers making their positions known. I have no problem with that. I'm going to look at it. I mean, I'll take it under advisement, but I'm going to read each one of them and I'm going to vote accordingly. I love the focus, and this speaks to QQ, of the oral health, which we have found is a major problem in our county. Mental health, I think, is a major problem. And this funding is about summer. Summer is June, July, and August, which is a quarter of the year. Just so you all know, we've raised about $6 million. If we were to prorate that, that would be $1.5 million to spend during the summer. Ms. McFadden threw out a $2.5 million number, and council seems to do a good job of splitting the difference. And so I would like to suggest that that we keep our funding at no more than $2 million. Obviously, if programs come in, we can always change it. Like we can change who makes the decision on programs. Just because we take a vote doesn't mean we can't reverse our position. So that's the first thing is I'd like to take Ms. McFadden's 2.5 and sort of average it with what a prorated amount would be of 1.5 to come up with $2 million as the maximum spend. The second part of my recommendation would be to focus primarily on oral health, mental health, as well as it's summertime, so summer activities that kids can go to. And then all of the rest of the recommendations in terms of giving extra points for everything, and transportation, bringing it to the directly to the person. I loved all of those. I just think that if we just stay focused, we'll be better off. And if we sort of set expectations reasonably at the $2 million mark. And then the final thing is just for Ms. McFadden made the motion. I think I seconded. So just maybe Ms. McFadden is something that I'll throw it out and others can comment on it. So the 2 million, the focus, kind of the recommendations, which is what they were, and taking the PR out for a later date.
Well, what about, I have a question regarding his supplemental motion. So you're taking out food insecurity.
I'm sorry, food insecurity.
Well, why not?
No, sir, I'm not.
So what only thing I would recommend, Member Mitchell, why not keep all of the tenets that we have said are important in play? Because if we start cherry picking, for example, one of the things that is of importance to the superintendent, Ms. Connor, is that our kids need to have health screenings and stuff like that, which we also would hope there will be options where people will respond because they got to get ready to come to kindergarten. So there are a variety of things that are in play that I think that through our ITN process, if we're talking about remedying school readiness, any one of those tenets come into play. So I just don't want us to cherry pick. I think we ought to be able to look at it in tandem and see the responsiveness that comes from the expanse of our community.
You're a
The
wise
cherries
man,
once
Mr.
they're in the
Jones.
bowl.
Can I comment?
It's an allegory.
Yes, sir.
Whenever you're ready.
No, I completely agree with Mr. Jones. I mean, because we have these priority areas, and I'm sure people were loud and clear at some of these issues, but just because I don't have a mental health issue and I may have a housing issue, that doesn't mean that my need is not as great, even though that wasn't voiced loud and clear. So I would love to have opportunities for all of the priority areas that were identified. And I agree, we shouldn't cherry pick because we heard something more often than the other. Let's just see what the service providers are able to bring forward. And then we have the option to decide in those areas. But I don't like the idea of taking certain topics off of the table for this.
Mr. Hannah.
All right, so just to be clear, I'm turned around now. So we are not voting on the funding opportunity program proposed, the application at all. We're still, the motion in the second is on the pages 13 and 14.
All 6 recommendations.
Right, on those 6 recommendations as potentially amended to a maximum amount of $2 million and to strike the public relations firm. Okay.
I'll accept it as a friendly amendment.
I'll second.
All right, so that's the motion on the
So,
table at the moment.
yeah, but I'm not quite finished. So, so it says proposed expansion of services. So that means no one could come forward with a new program.
That's correct.
It would take too
We're
long to, I
focusing
think,
on
develop if it's a
existing
summer
programs
program.
For the summer, just for the summer opportunities. That was the rest.
But they could do like a pop-up and just move it to a different place. You see what I'm saying?
No, and I'm gonna give you a specific example. So I have been big on this birth to 3 campaign and starting, having conversations with Healthy Start and all these groups, and Tallahassee Memorial Hospital. So I would, whoever brings that proposal forward would not be able to start then until September or whenever we couldn't start that program in June, is what I'm hearing.
Right. What we do not have time to do, with all due respect to Mr. Rick, I'll say him. We are fully prepared that when if you approve which we will rename it an ITN, when we get to that part, we are fully prepared to move forward with that, to issue that and then get that moving. We are not in a position for this summer that we could evaluate properly a new program.
Okay, let me give that's fine. So that's going to have to wait until the fall. Another example, if our community has 21st century programs that want to be expanded in the summer, right? That potentially would be an opportunity for them to make application to extend 21st century program.
Yes.
Yes.
But just not a new program. Okay.
Yes.
And I would hope in that same vein, if we've got summer enrichment programs that they then want to extend an additional day to Saturday
Yes.
or Saturdays. Okay.
Yes.
And then but also tell me when in the fall, do we evaluate again in the summer to begin in September?
So
Is there any delay between the ending of funding on August 31st and then when funding would start again for opportunities in the fall?
So when the final report is done, that is when funding options B comes from QQ. And you will look at those, they will go to the Program Services Committee first, and there will be recommendations that are developed out of funding options B as an option. Of course, as a council, you could bring another focus, but because you have these priorities, the options that they're going to present will be within those priorities. And then this council will have to decide of those priorities and those options, what you want to put forth for the fall with the funding that is left from this fiscal year, so that those contracts would happen starting October 1st or sooner, but probably October 1st.
So there would be a gap during the month of September, potentially.
Potentially, because you expect that your summer programs are going to end, and we have to have time to develop the RFP, issue the RFP, evaluate. And if you all will evaluate those applications, you have to, so we need some time in order to get that funding started in October 1.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Cummings?
I just need clarification. I'm kind of confused now. That we don't have time to look at new programs, only existing programs? Can
Only
apply
for the
summer?
Only for the summer.
Capacity expansion.
Can I comment, please? Yeah.
Please,
so-
yes.
Yeah, that's okay. So for the expedited funding, which we're trying to get out the door immediately, we want to look at current programs that are already in existence, so they can say, this is what we currently do. We have a record of that, but they are expanding those services, or they're taking those services to different areas. We want to be able to evaluate those for this summer. We are definitely looking at innovations and different ideas and thoughts for the options, for the expanded
expansion of it,
opportunity starting in the fall. Does that make sense?
It does, but we're looking at expansion of existing programs to utilize the dollars for the summer. Correct. Okay.
And Mr. Chair, if I might, that does not mean that next summer, because we now have lead, that this council could say we want innovative programs for next summer, because we would be doing that in advance of next summer. So this is really to honor the council's desire to fill some gaps, expand some programs, and get some funding on the street for this summer.
Mr. Mitchell?
Glenn, I have a question for you, and this, I think I know the answer, but I want to double check. At one of the community conversations, I think it may have been the Walker Ford, but at one of the community conversations, there was a gentleman there, and I'm going to mess up the name of his program. I think it's Torchbearer Leadership Academy, something close to that. No, Torch. It's a leadership academy for young men.
Okay.
And I want to say, he said they were in Frenchtown is where they're located. They don't currently, as far as I know, offer a summer program, but the program that they offer throughout the rest of the year would qualify for these funds because
that's
it
an
exists.
existing
But they currently offer a program.
Yeah,
So they're
that would
existing.
count.
Right. But they don't, they're currently providing services. If they don't do the exact same thing that they've been doing in the past for summer, the same group of people want to, would they qualify if it wasn't the, again, I don't know what the Leadership Academy, let's say they get a diploma at the end, that if these young men go through this, don't go through the same program that they currently offer, but they want to offer enhancement to leadership, but a different course that deals with leadership and young men, would they qualify?
Yeah, so we're not pulling them to the law. I mean, so if they are a service provider, what we're trying to avoid is for Xander to wake up tomorrow
Got
and say, I don't do this, but this ITN's on the road, on the street, so I'm gonna come up with something.
I'd be a really
real
good
quick.
babysitter.
Right,
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying
I
to
got you.
prevent.
To
So-
avoid mission creep.
Correct, right, so we want people that are currently providing a service. This is what they do. We know they have a program in place. You can apply to expand your program for summer.
It's a smart thing because trying to start up a program, build a curriculum, build all the support services around it. It's for a summer program. We're already,
Right.
we're jumping up into May pretty soon, and
So
it's not a reasonable expectation.
So if I can, and Ms. McFadden, you tell me if I'm wrong in terms of what your motion said, it is taking, and the scattered amended recommendations, it's taking the committee's recommendation exactly as it is. It's removing the public relations portion.
Correct.
And it's putting a dollar amount of $2 million.
That's correct. That's what's on the table.
And to Mr. Jones's.
No, that comes in the next.
Oh,
section.
not a word out of it. That's it. That's what
That's
your
it.
motion says.
Mhm.
That's where Your Honor, that's the motion that I would like for us to.
Any other
to vote on.
discussion?
All motions.
And Mr.
Yeah, I
Klein,
know.
you seconded that.
I
Any
did.
other discussion?
Yeah, it's out there.
Yeah, we're ready to vote.
Any objection?
PR is gone, right?
PR is,
For now.
Show the motion.
Just for now.
We'll show the motion passing unanimously.
amen. Thank you, guys.
Bringing us
Labor of
to-
love.
Okay, so no, we're not done yet. I'm so sorry.
bringing
Okay,
us to-
one
go ahead,
final
Dr.
thing.
Glenn.
Yeah, one final thing. Okay, so we did ask, considering the fact that this needs to go out tomorrow, we did ask the staff to put together a simple procurement process. I'm going to turn it over to you all and ask you all to please review the procurement process, and then we'll entertain any questions, and then hopefully move over to the next committee
And that's-
after that.
And that's at page 15, right?
I'd like to move it forward with two amendments. One, that it is changed to an ITN. And second, that the wording is amended to allow any entity, or if you want to be specific, nonprofits, for-profits, public housing authorities, small businesses, and public institutions of higher learning, but I think it might be easier.
So just a point of process, we always ask for public comment before we have the motion. So if it's
True.
okay, if you could hold it, let's just make sure we don't have any public comment.
Ms. Clay, is there any public comment on the procurement process?
There's no public comment.
Excellent. Any discussion? So there's a motion, is it
Second.
second? Motion and seconded, McFadden and Mitchell. Discussion of the procurement process, ITN, available to anybody, any form of entity. Ms. Executive Director Green.
One more point of clarification, Council Member Jones wanted us to change it to an ITN, and we have to You all will have
That's
to.
part of that motion.
Is that part of the motion? I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
I can't keep up either, Executive Director.
I'm
was
sorry.
part of
We
the
got it.
All right, any discussion, questions, corrections, objections?
Just one more thing. Can you please recite again qualifying entities who can respond?
Well,
Get Chris
qualifying
Rowe.
entities, either we just have it be open, or if we want to be specific, for-profits, nonprofits, public housing authorities, small businesses, public institutions of higher learning, or private institutions of higher learning.
Point of clarification.
Mr.
Just a
O'Brien.
comment, we're asking organizations that have existing programs in place. I would just leave it open.
Yeah, I just.
No reason. to
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Just leave it open.
One more quick
I still.
clarification. We have our general counsel on. We may have to change the RFP in order to go to an ITN because there are legal things that have to go into it if it's an ITN versus an RFP, which is going to throw our timeline off.
Just on the bottom of page 17.
Ms. McFadden.
Ms. Green, I will review and determine whether or not any changes are necessary. Perhaps the approval could be to move forward with the ITN approach. And if that doesn't work for whatever legal reason, then I'll work with you on how to fix that.
Okay, and also keep in mind that we have in the proposal that you may not get everything that you request. And so with that, in its current form, we have the ability to, so we're not going to exceed what you've requested, but we have the ability to say, no, we're only going to be able to fund this.
Well, let me tell you what my concern in lies there. If I come to you with a proposal that costs $100,000 to do and you only give me $50,000, then I may be wrong where I can't complete the project and you give me an award of $50,000 and I can't satisfy any of the deliverables put forward. So I don't think that we should be in the business of underfunding any legitimate proposal that comes to us. Either we can afford to do it and give them the amount that they've requested, hold them accountable to bring back to us the deliverables associated with the same, or we don't fund them. I think you put them at enormous disadvantage.
Mr. Jones, the language at 17, did you see the language at 17? Because I think that's kind of the idea.
Right.
At the bottom of 17, submitting an application is not a guarantee or commitment of funding. We do not expect to be able to cover all funding requests. We may not be able.
Well, the good part about an ITN that then perhaps they can,
You can negotiate.
but what can be very well satisfied with the amount that we do. But if I've got in there particular items or purchases, whatever it is in that description, I can't, if I'm running a computer lab and you're not paying, you don't give me enough money that I can buy printers, then there's no point in giving it to me. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. Ms. McFadden, you're recognized.
Just as a point of information too, on an ITN, and I've been in the situation where I haven't always liked it, but it's very powerful, is if we have, for example, an entity that comes to us and they weren't part of working with an intermediary, but we like their programming, and we want to say to them, we'll fund you, but you do have to become part of this other ITN that was submitted. You're allowed to do that under an ITN piece, which I think adds a huge
Gives you
benefit.
greater flexibility.
So did General Counsel Road, did I hear him just say that he thinks we can still get this done? More or less?
Well,
It's a conditional.
he's gonna review it. But again,
The motion, though, I think is what he's saying, sir, is that we probably need to change the motion that says, leave it as an ITN unless council finds that we can't, and then we're conditionally
approving it as an ITN.
right, to then turn it back to an RFP.
But we're authorizing staff to put this on the street if they can't make the ITN work within the time.
So that we're not coming back to vote.
Yeah.
Did I get that right, there, Mr.
Correct.
General Counsel?
Are we ready? Are we willing to go till Monday? I mean, if it's an extra day, does it matter?
That's right.
I'm sorry, I was trying to determine if going to an ITM was gonna mess up our timeline.
So
Yeah.
So
I'm
Executive
talking about on the
Director
back
Green,
end.
Here's the motion is that our first preference is the ITN, but that staff is authorized to issue this as it is if the timeline can't be met with an ITN. So that's the motion.
And removing only not-for-profits.
All right, once again, any public comment on the motion? Seeing none. Any other discussion on the motion? Any objection on the motion? Seeing no objection, the motion carries unanimously.
We're done.
Dr. Glenn. Oh, great job, Dr. Glenn. Judge Terrence Watts is recognized and discussed the Enterprise Software Solution Committee and for the consideration of that work plan.
All right, so we did meet on April 6th to finalize the work plan. We provided specific instruction and recommendations for scoring criteria in the selection of a technology firm to develop and implement the enterprise software solution for the CSC. During that conversation, the work group felt imperative to pace the expectations for the first procurement while also communicating a big vision. So ultimately, through that conversation, it's good to have some experts on there because we were thinking about pretty much going in the kitchen sink, paraphrasing, but ultimately it's going to be in our best interest that we set the bones, and then as we develop with a timeline, be able to pull in some of the different capacities and resources that we're trying to accomplish with the software that we choose or the company that we choose. So as such, staff developed a 3-year pacing guide to reflect where the council would like to go with its technology platform. But before we go into the work plan, I'll let Holly take over, and I don't think it's in the packet, but it is on the screen.
Ms. McPhail.
What you just will see on the screen, and the reason why it's not in your package is because it really is just a visualization. What we've been talking about with the enterprise resource planning system are these 5 primary components. And I'm going to try to move this so you can kind of see what that last one is intended to be. Just around a customer relationship management marketing tool, decision support and task tracking, fiscal management, HR management, and an investment. We're calling it an investment management system, which operates in kind of in other terms, often as a grants management system. Setting it forth this way does not mean that we're going to cover every single one of these. We might stick with some of the solutions that we already have, but this is what we were recommending we put out. And I want you to imagine that this is the core hub of internal operations for the CSC. And that if we were to think about kind of our year 1 goals, it's really to establish 2-way communication with the providers. And so kind of imagining it like a hub in that way. But the vision is that in year 2, we would create a kind of a coordinated system and be able to offer case management like tools directly to providers that we're working with, that should they choose to use them. And on top of that, creating an intelligent referral system where providers are talking with one another. There are existing tools right now and that are kind of doing this already. One is within our continuum of care, where they use an HMIS system. Also, our partners at LCSO are using a system called Spirit. And so building on the technology that already exists in our community, can we integrate with those, communicating that in this procurement process, that those systems exist, but that this procurement process is not to expand that at this point, but that in our year 2 pacing guide, it would. Take that one step further, looking at year 3, is that those families that they serve would then have the opportunity to interact not only directly with us, but be able to send information in kind of a life wallet or a vault or like Apple Wallet like you might have. And that's also something that is supported by the data and the information that was shared, not only in the needs assessment, but also even have come up in the listening sessions that we've done thus far. So envisioning it this way and being able to articulate kind of these year 1, year 2, year 3 goals in this first procurement, but being very clear that all we're looking for this procurement is this core piece of the system.
Right. Yeah, so now that you've seen the big vision, so we'll remind you guys at the council that the objective of the first procurement will be to create the tools to accomplish the goals, year 1 goals, while knowing where we want to move toward in the future. So the work plan that's in the, you have the work in the packet? Okay, so the work plan in the packet, we will be asking for approval. This is the same one that we saw last month, but we decided to hold off, that we would discuss it at this, okay? And it does have the phases and the timelines are still applicable. So I'll pause there before I make a motion, but ultimately it is just approving timeline ultimately.
So before us is the 3-year vision and work plan presentation. Any public comment? Ms. Clay?
There's no public comment.
Excellent. Mr. Watts, I'd ask for a motion.
Okay, so I'd like a motion to approve the work.
Moved by Jones,
That was,
seconded by Glenn. Excellent. So I have one and only one question. Do we know what the money is associated with this, just as we're thinking about the rest of the money on the streets?
For year one, the council approved 150,000.
All right, perfect. So any other questions or discussion? Seeing no other questions or discussion, any objections?
Nope.
Seeing no objections, we'll show the Enterprise Software Solutions Work Plan approved. Brings us to Mr. Mitchell. Nicely done, Mr. Watts. And thank you for, I'm flying, trying to get some moving, but thank you for taking this project on. Mr. Mitchell, for the treasurer's report, you are recognized, sir.
thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I've gone through with Ms. Green, and if you have any questions, I did have some. All of them were answered satisfactorily. You are going to see something a little different next month, but if you have questions on the expenditures, I'm happy to.
I move acceptance of the treasurer's report.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment on the treasurer's report?
There's no public comment.
Any objections, discussions, questions? I think someone should ask hard questions, Mr. Mitchell.
I am ready.
Yeah.
Are we buying crypto?
That's Ms. McFadden's here.
How many diapers come in a box?
So we'll show the treasurer's report approved with that.
May I also, if I may, because I don't think Mr. Mitchell was here when I said this at the beginning of the meeting. One of the recommendations that I made was that we go to a consent agenda that would include things like the treasurer's report. If there were any questions that needed to be asked, and any one of us could pull an item from consent for discussion. Otherwise, they would all be together combined for us to vote on them in mass in an effort, I think, to try to streamline our meetings.
Yeah, and we asked,
So I wanted you to know that I made that recommendation before you got here.
And we asked Executive Director Green to propose a consent agenda process for us, whether the treasury report belongs on it. I hadn't thought about that before this moment, but.
And I'm happy to, well, one, I'm happy to do it less often. Two, obviously, if there's questions, they can be pulled out.
Yeah,
And maybe, we just kind of want to hold it off to like once every 6 months, quarterly. I mean, however you guys want.
There will be meetings.
Treasurer, if there's something of interest that needs to be highlighted, then certainly you would make that point. But otherwise, if it's just the numbers being the numbers, then we can just keep it going.
Excellent. So we'll show the treasurer's report approved. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, as always.
Can I please remind all the council members to speak into the microphone? Thank you.
And so we will show the treasurer's report approved. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, as always, for your stewardship. Old business, investment advisory firm, invitation to negotiate update. Ms. McFadden, you're recognized.
Okay, just as a really quick update, there is some forecasting in here, but I think more importantly, Holly and I have talked, we've got county and city representatives that we're going to be talking to in the next couple of weeks to get all their input, and then we'll be coming back to you with further recommendations. So just in process at this time.
Excellent, excellent. Any questions for Ms. McFadden or discussion of our investment advisory firm ITM update? Seeing no takers, bring us to new business. CSC Leon staff purchasing cards. Executive Director Green, you're recognized.
Yes, actually, I'm going to throw it over to the general counsel. I should have noted that, but it is a resolution to allow staff to obtain purchasing cards to cut down on any reimbursements that we have had to purchase on behalf of the council. But I'll turn it over to General Counsel Rowe.
Mr. Rowe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and Ms. Green. So the resolution the council has before it would authorize staff to apply for, on behalf of the CSC Leon, what's commonly known as a P card. It's basically a purchasing card or a procurement card that is used essentially like a Visa or MasterCard. In fact, I think it will be one of those. And that allows staff to make purchases up to a designated amount without seeking pre-approval from council for each and every purchase. The idea is that this will streamline the purchasing process for goods and services. It will be in all respects subject to the previously adopted purchasing policy adopted by CSC. The resolution itself is relatively short. However, it does include as an appendix a policy guiding expenditures and purchases which can be made through the P card.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Mr. Chairman, I'm offering a motion for acceptance of the recommendation regarding the staff purchasing, the resolution for staff purchasing P cards.
Motion by Mr. Jones. Is there a second? Second by Mr. O'Brien. Discussion, any discussion of the P cards?
So wait, yes. So, so have we set a maximum amount?
It's in the.
It's
purchase
already.
policy.
All right, I've had a chance to even.
Yeah, and
That's okay.
and the $10,000 is per purchase. It's not, it is, that part's different than the credit card. It isn't like you can have a balance of 10,000. It's per purchase.
But expenses still have to be reviewed by.
Yes.
the Organization, by the treasurer, by the chair. all of
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Right, so you would, then you would be seeing these
Everyone.
purchases.
Yeah, and I appreciate your reaction, Mr. Hannah, because I've had, seems like I have endless issues associated with foolish use of P cards, and we have got budget hawks on this, and there will not be any P card foolishness.
I
can
thank you.
What a good choice of words.
Well, we have thousands of P cards out there, and no foolishness in this room, but there has been some foolishness, yes.
Always
Well,
makes me nervous.
That's where you just limit the number. We are a large organization, but literally, I think we have a small handful for that purpose. But you still have to have them.
Yeah, we're gonna have two, right?
Two possible, I'm sorry.
Two possibly.
Two, possibly three, and they will be through Prime Meridian Bank. Yes, so yes.
All right, so moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Any objection? Show that the resolution.
2022
Any public
Does the
comment?
treasurer get a P card? Does he get a P card?
No.
No, does treasurer?
We don't trust them.
You don't want me having
That's
your
not a
money.
concern.
Any objection to the resolution? The resolution passes unanimously, bringing us to
Next meeting date.
meeting dates, Thursday, May 19th, at the county commission chambers. This room is being renovated. So not the city commission, the county commission, because parking is harder. And we have a program services committee meeting Tuesday, May 31st at the Southern Group at Mr. Mitchell's. We've got finance and budget committee to be determined. Enterprise Software Solutions Work Group is June 2nd via Zoom at 1 p.m. And then the next governing and then the June governing council meeting, the full council meets June the 16th at 2 p.m.
Did you say what program services is meeting?
Program services.
Southern
meets
Group.
at Paul
You're not on our
Mitchell's
committee. Why
office.
are we meeting in your office?
It's convenient, I guess. I was asked.
Oh,
May
no, I'm
31st
happy.
at
And by
5.
the way, I attended the last.
You
meeting.
attended it, but you're not on our
I,
committee. Why
oh,
we
I
have-
was told that. Yes.
Okay, you're not
So,
on our committee.
I was scolded.
Mr. Hannah, you're recognized.
Thank you, Your Honor. I probably missed this too. So when do we anticipate being in our new home?
So we are hoping on the hopeful end, mid-August, on the late end for the September meeting.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
I just want to go on record that I don't think we should be having our meeting at Mr. Mitchell's office when Mr. Mitchell is not a member of our committee.
We appreciate that.
No, we
Next
don't.
meeting agenda
No, we
review.
don't. You weren't at the meeting.
Next meeting agenda review. Our next agenda will of course include our standard public comments, approval of the agenda, approval of the minutes. In addition, we'll review the summer funding RFP evaluation results and approve the recommended community investments. Approve public awareness, brand development, ITN procurement. No, we won't because we don't
Right.
do that. I think because we're not going to have the PR firm, right?
Right.
And then review draft funding options B, and set direction for program services.
No, we won't be doing funding options B in May.
All right,
That will be in
excellent.
June. That's my mistake.
So that'll be June. That'll be for the June agenda, hopefully, with any luck at all. But we'll review the summer funding RFP evaluation results, and that is plenty.
And then 2 presentations that we must have because we've put them off
For trim?
already for the Navigator. The council had asked to see that Hope Florida Navigator presentation. It's about 15 minutes. And then the DCF reorganization, which might be about 10.
Excellent, perfect. Any other items for the agenda that anyone would like to propose?
I have
Seeing,
a quick comment.
yes,
So
Ms.
I'm on
McFadden.
a lot of boards, but this is the only board I'm on that's a publicly, but I'm used to the agendas having timeframes associated with them. And I get very nervous, like when we have speakers and I see that we're going to go to 5:30 or 6, and I really like to stay within the timeframes that are set for the meetings. Not that we're doing bad today, we're doing great. But I'm just wondering if we're gonna have speakers, if we can be very clear, they have 20 minutes or they have 15 minutes. And that, I don't know if it could go on the agenda or if it has to be behind the scenes. But I would like us to be very cognizant of time.
I think, and I, go
But-
ahead.
but
Mr.
Ms.
Hanna.
McFadden, is that the problem? I mean, I think what made the things rather laborious today was our inquiry and our comments back. I thought, and I was going to say it in member comments, I thought Mrs. Dr. Williams' presentation was.
It's not about any particular.
But I think that we.
You.
But I think that, I mean, your point is well made, but for example, today, we seem to add length.
Right, and I'm just saying.
Yes, who's we? Let's clarify
do.
who we
Start.
is.
Don't you start.
Carmen's probably the worst, but but yes, to your point, but we'll have a 10-minute item on agenda review. An hour later, we're still being asked questions.
So
So
why don't we say that absent, would you want to set all presentations presumptively or 10 minutes or less?
No. I'm just suggesting that on the agenda, like when I go to most business meetings, it says, we're going to do this from X time to X. And they build in time for conversation or what have you. And then but we end on time.
Ending on time and day. My experience is that they rarely follow. I'm on a lot of boards as well.
Yeah.
The ones that have it, it's just a shot in the dark, and sometimes you go and sometimes you don't. But I do agree that there's a discipline that we need to have as an organization.
Yeah, I think.
Be timely.
And I think it's fair to the speakers too, to have a sense of
Yeah.
exactly what they're gonna.
Do you want, I would suggest that that the 10 minute, unless we decide longer, that the presentations are 10 minutes or 15 minutes or no more than that.
It could be a part of the recommendation that comes back with the amended agenda with the consent added.
There you go. Ms. Executive Director Green, tell us what to do if you.
Oh my gosh, tell you what to do. So we do try to ensure that we give time limits for our presenters. Of course, for something like the QQ, we would go a little bit longer. We can add times to the agenda so that we stay within our 2 to 5 o'clock. Ms. Clay has offered to serve as our timekeeper, so if things start going a little further, she'll ding. So we can absolutely do that because we don't want to keep anybody longer.
Outstanding.
We know y'all
Hannah,
are.
did you want to be heard?
So on the next meeting, when we have to have these 2 presentations, is also the time where this group is going to discuss all of the funding for the summer. So what are we having for dinner?
These presentations, I promise you,
No,
they're
it's
going to
like
be via
25
Zoom.
I don't think
They'll
it's
be
more
10
about the
minutes. I just don't want to
presentation.
put the secretary of, the assistant secretary of DCF, I don't want to put them off yet another. So they've made arrangements to be via Zoom. We'll keep them to 10 minutes. So that's 20 minutes on the agenda that we will. And we'll get them out of the way early.
And so as it relates to those funding options. Two things. One, I'd love to know I'd like to know so that I understand their personal bias, who is going to make up that committee. And I hope that it reflects a demographic makeup of the county. And two, the sooner you have the results of their recommendations, the better, because I can tell you, if I frequently am reading it as I sit here, but if you send it to me early, I'll be prepared.
Okay, you will see in the,
Timeline.
I think it's a request for proposal. There is a timeline in there that shows you when we issue. Evaluator trainings actually will start next week. And so we did get those appointed. As soon as we get those, we will publish that because we have to. And so it's pretty tight, but the evaluators have 2 days, so they've got.
Right. When the evaluators get theirs, if you just send them, if you make an electronic copy, send them over to me, I'll start reviewing them at that point.
Perfect. And it's electronic. We also have no problems providing you guys with the applications when they come in. We can just share it with you. I don't have my glasses on.
Yeah, that's great. As they're coming in.
May 13th. So we will do that. Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Any other discussion of the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda will show the agenda approved. Member comments, any member comments, any member comments? Ms. McFadden, you're recognized.
Just a quick invitation for anyone who's interested. I sit on the Scouts board for South Georgia and North Florida. We're now the Scouts. We have 2 Scout troops that are girls in
Excellent.
County, if you're not aware. And we are going to be recognizing Al Lawson, the Langfords, Bill Montford, Ben Watkins, and Rick Grant. It's at the University Center Club. If you're interested, let me know.
A great group.
Outstanding. Any other member comments? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all for your input. Great, outstanding meeting. Dr. Glenn, you're magnificent, in my opinion.
Yes.
You're not allowed to.
No, I thought I heard.
I would have made this
I'm going.
made this very short if I had an opportunity to have.
Yeah. Okay.
I said it in a nice way.
Can you bring that picture?
You want to look at those?
Yeah.
I want to see
You have a great evening. All right.
Then we'll let you know. Okay.
I will make sure you find out what.
Does not, absolutely. Absolutely. Where you going? You leaving already? Okay, okay, okay.
Make a friendly amendment to the ITN, even though it wasn't discussed, based on the thing we talked about on Tuesday with the digital technology, since they didn't dive into the RFP. Is that okay? It doesn't change anything. So.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
No, we're
'cause
gonna.
We put home-based and mobile delivery, meaning like come to the.
I think I can make an executive decision. Given your comment, because that was, we had a long conversation.
We can make things a lot more complicated for you guys.
But I get, it's okay. I get it, because.
Are we still broadcasting? Oh, yes, we are.
But I get it.